Good evening, everyone. Apologies for the decidedly short notice. This was not planned or in any way. It was just kind of a reflex. I've had a not happy day. Nothing. No one is injured. Let me make that clear first and foremost. No one has been put under threat. Nobody's injured. Nobody's passed away. It's all the intangibles and primarily self-inflicted on my part. I'm fine in bodily sense. It's just been a bad day. And so I need to do something to take my proverbial mind off, at least for a little bit. And so I thought, what better way? What better way to do so than, let's talk about affirmative action. Why not? I mean, what better refuge does someone like me have for a bad day than talking about affirmative action? Oh no, I forgot AAA still going, isn't it? Oh man. Well, I always intentionally I try to be mindful of my friends' shows and broadcasts and schedules and not intentionally step on anybody's toes. So I hope I'm not distracting anybody from Sinatra and Drunkle and them. I apologize for that. That wasn't my intention. So if this gets back to Sinatra, please let him know that I was not meaning to horn in on his regular time slot. But yeah, this is just an escape, a little bit of therapy or something. I don't know right now. I'm a little out of sorts. Oh, well, what are you going to do? Life is life, right? Life will find a way. Somehow, some way. It'll all work out in the end. For better or worse. Yeah. Oh, well, this isn't bartender talk. Let's talk about legal stuff. But before I get to that, who is joining me? Thankfully joining me on this little diversion. Shady Grin. It's pizza night, Scribbles. Having Hawaiian, the best type of pizza ever. There are many who would disagree, especially if there's pineapple on that pizza. I wouldn't be one of them, but all the same. Blakester, hi, hello, and salutations. Hello, Blakester. Brittany Holland, heyo. Ryan R, all the waves. Tall person, hoy. Robert Pincus, hi, Scribe and Chat. Hi, Robert Pincus. Keldrig, evening, gents. Evening, Keldrig. Kiro Soldier, hey, Scribe. Hey, Kiro. Tack Alpaca, hello, all. Hello, Attack Alpaca. A2P, heya. Heya, A2P. Matt Barnes, hey, team. Hey, Matt. So, yeah, and for those of you that I missed, if I missed anybody, or those of you in the future, good evening. So, why are we here? Oh, the eternal question. Well, apparently we're here because DEI in the aftermath of the SCOTUS affirmative action decision, what's an employer to do? I don't know, given the fact that the SCOTUS decision affected affirmative action in colleges and universities. I don't know. What is an employer to do? I mean, an employer isn't using racial discrimination in their decision-making processes, are they? So this comes from a law firm of all places, which is going to be interesting. So Constagny, Brooks, Smith, and Profit, LLP, going to discuss with us the aftermath of the DEI, or actually DEI in the aftermath of an absence of affirmative action in colleges. I'll be curious to see how they connect the dots on that one. And this was apparently webinared on October 31st, so just a few days ago. So very new, very new. This isn't years old or months old. It's basically right now. A couple more hellos, then I'll get into it. Jam, hey Scribe, hey Jam. Random American, ha. Well, that was the Comedy Network before it merged with the Comedy Channel to become Comedy Central. Urkele DeStefano, word. The word of today is, I don't know, professional conflict of interest or stuff, DEI? I don't know. Anyway, this sucker runs just over an hour. For the sake of my situation, I might just do the whole thing just to try to cleanse my mental palate. Anyway, this comes, Kara Crotty of Columbia, South Carolina, October 31st, 2023. Constagny, Brooks, Smith, and Profit. And affirmative action in employment. Have I delayed enough for people to get into the room? I think I have. Let's go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Constangy's webinar, DEI and the Aftermath of the SCOTUS Affirmative Action Decision.
You guys hear that okay? Let me know in the chat. Zan Wild, Ola, I have no sound. Do I have sound? Am I talking? Well, I think I have sound. Do you guys have sound? If you don't have sound, this is going to be a very, very brief broadcast. So let me know in the chat. Did you hear that? 5x5 says Kiro Soldier. All right. So Zan, I think it might be you. I think it might be a you problem.
What's an employer to do?
Yes.
A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please submit them through the chat function. You can access the chat through the toolbar located at the bottom of your screen.
Okay, so I assume this was a webinar done internally and then posted to YouTube after the fact. This wasn't a live stream per se.
Our presenter will leave time to answer your questions.
Is there going to be a land acknowledgement? I really hope there's going to be a land acknowledgement.
This program is pending SHRM and HRCI credit. We will be sharing those codes at the end of this presentation, so please stick around in order to get the codes.
HRCI credit. I get credit for watching this if I was an employee? Okay.
Lastly, we will be providing a copy of the PowerPoint used during today's webinar and a recording of the presentation.
Oh boy.
These materials will be sent to you once the recording has been uploaded by tomorrow morning.
Okay.
I'm now going to turn it over to today's presenter, Kara.
Okay. So we're right into it. I'm still hoping for a land acknowledgement. Haven't had one of those in a while.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I see people are still filing in, so we'll give it a few minutes.
It's unfortunate that I think the first speaker was using a headset because it was pretty clear, and now our speaker here is using her webcam mic or something. Oh well.
To let people make sure they can join. All right. I'll just reiterate what Victoria said about the presentation material.
Okay, I'm not going to listen to that a second time. Can we get into the presentation? There we go.
For joining us today, and thank you to Victoria for the introduction.
Kara Crotty, Chair, Affirmative Action / OFCCP. I don't know what that means. Compliance Practice Group. Okay.
I wish everyone a good afternoon or good morning if you're joining us from the West Coast. My name is Kara Crotty, and I am chair of Constangy's Affirmative Action OFCCP Compliance Practice Group.
So there's affirmative action compliance in your law firm? Okay, how's that work?
And I spend a significant amount of my time advising federal contractors of their affirmative action legal obligations and employers in general about their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices.
I love a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant.
So I'm really excited to present to you today about the latest developments on diversity, equity, and inclusion since the Supreme Court's decision in June.
Good.
I am going to, at this point, turn the video off. I think it can be a little distracting, and you'd rather look at the slides than me anyway. And I have a tendency to talk with my hands, so I don't want to be distracting. So.
You were a tiny little square up in the corner, Kara. You weren't distracting at all, but as you please.
We'll turn that off and just go with the slides for now.
Okay.
Also, in case anyone is not familiar with Constangy.
I am not. Please do tell.
We are a national labor and employment law firm. We have well over 200 lawyers from coast to coast.
Wow.
And we practice in all the typical labor and employment areas, as well as cybersecurity and data privacy.
Wow, very extensive. Let's see. Over 200 attorneys in 21 states help our clients navigate the ever-changing legal landscape in employment law and other practice areas. Our practices include affirmative action, appellate, background check and FCRA litigation, California class actions, cannabis and employee substance abuse, class collective actions, cybersecurity and data privacy, diversity, equity, and inclusion, employee benefits, employment litigation prevention and defense, ERISA litigation, immigration, labor relations, trade secrets and unfair competition, transactional solutions, wage and hour compliance litigation, whistleblower and retaliation, workers' compensation defense, and something that's covered up by the progress bar on the video. So all that stuff and more.
Just a couple of disclaimers before we get started. First of all, I'm not providing legal advice.
No, not providing legal advice. We're just going to talk about what's an employer to do in the absence of affirmative action. It's not legal advice. It's just, glorified opinion.
Today, we're obviously going to be talking about a lot of legal concepts, but just want to make sure that you get specific legal counsel that's relevant to your specific issues in the DEI space.
Okay.
We're just providing some general information today.
Sure.
And one other point, DEI has become a political issue.
It's always been a political issue. It's rooted in politics, racial politics primarily, but also sexual politics, equity, equality, and so on. It can't avoid it.
And so we are going to be discussing how conservatives and liberals, and I'm using the air quotes, I'm gesticulating like I said I would do, but you can't see me. But we are going to be discussing how different political parties have been reacting to the Supreme Court's decision. So
oh, yes. Okay. Well, that's fair enough. Fair enough. You're going to talk about the attorneys general letters, I'm guessing. The 13 Republican attorneys general and the response by the Democrats, I'm guessing.
Please don't interpret my comments as me endorsing one side or one view over another.
Okay.
I truly hope to present both sides in an objective way. So,
well, I appreciate that, Kara, and I sincerely do, because I like objectivity. We'll see if you succeed. I suppose we'll find out as we go. But before I do that, Derek LaRue, thank you so much, Derek LaRue, as always, for your continued generosity and support. Appreciate it. Hope you're having a good Monday evening, all things considered. And I hope you enjoy the show. Also, Spoonie the Rebel, hello. Miranda Stone, hello. Real Wade Nation Gaming Clips, hello. Appreciate it.
So this is a nonpartisan arena for the day. All right, so let's obviously start with the Supreme Court decision.
Oh, you say I can't stand stuff like this. You sound like you're tired. Yeah, I know I'm tired. Like I won't elaborate any further. But just for those of you joining late, I've had a particularly unhappy day on a emotional level. Nobody is hurt, nothing is harmed, no bones were broken or anything. Just an unhappy day, and I, rather than just sit with myself and my brain going in 17 different directions, I figured I'd focus on something for a little while, and that is the impetus for this stream, amongst the fact that it is a relatively new broadcast about a subject that I'm always interested in. So that's why. If I sound a little down, I apologize. I'll try to energize myself a bit as we go. I'm sure the subject matter will take its course, but I appreciate it.
And I am not going to do a super deep dive on the court's decision itself, because that would take up the whole hour.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, you're a law firm, so you can summarize it. All right.
But we do need to do a very basic overview. The Students for Fair Admissions challenged the process used by Harvard University and by the University of North Carolina in selecting their student bodies. And the main issue was whether it was permissible to use race as a factor in selecting students.
Well, I don't know if it's in her summary or not, but the primary question was the diversity argument justification for continuing to use race as a factor? And that was the primary question. I mean, race being used as a factor was there for what purpose? Well, the purpose was, according to the colleges and the university, that diversity was a justifiable reason. And in making that case to the court, they failed. So diversity is not a, for lack of a better phrase, affirmative defense to affirmative action. And if it's not an affirmative defense to affirmative action when it comes to colleges and universities under Title VI, then it's going to have a real hard time justifying itself under Title VII, where the mechanics are effectively the same, but just for employers.
Both Harvard and UNC admitted that they used race as a factor, and they argued that this was lawful based on prior Supreme Court precedent that allowed for it,
yeah, except it wasn't.
Or at least a limited purpose and for a limited period of time. Those cases go back to the Greta versus Bollinger, Fisher versus the University of Texas. So there was really no questions of fact. There were admissions that race was a part of the admissions practice.
Yeah, a part. But how much a part does it need to be racially discriminatory and unfair? It's like being a little pregnant, right?
The Supreme Court held that activity violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, as well as Title VI. So the 14th Amendment prohibits states from denying equal protection of the law, and that includes making distinctions based on race.
Right, which honestly should have superseded the entire idea of affirmative action from the get-go. But oh well, we just had, 40, 50 years of it or whatever. Yeah, oh well.
So any action that is based on race would be subject to the strict scrutiny analysis, which means that the practice must further a compelling governmental interest and that the use of race must be narrowly tailored.
Right, and they weren't narrowly tailoring it. They were keeping it very amorphous and just used as a tool here, there, and otherwise, to some extent or another, difficult to tell case by case. And again, their primary defense of using it was the benefits afforded by the diversity outcome. And that didn't convince anybody either.
And in these circumstances, the court found that the university's practices did not survive that strict scrutiny.
Right.
And there were really three main aspects or points of that decision. The first was that the university's practices went too far. And the court found that because, and I like their terminology, they said the college admissions process is a zero-sum outcome.
Is that what they said? I don't know. And by the way, I'd let her keep going, but I occasionally do have to interject for the sake of, transformative work and all that kind of thing. But so far, I'll give Kara Crotty credit. She's gone through this with a relatively nonpartisan report.
If you're providing a benefit to some applicants, but not to others, then you're necessarily advantaging some at the expense of others.
Exactly. Or at least on the basis of things that have absolutely nothing to say about their character or merit towards qualifying for a place at a college. Again, as I've said in the past, and as we heard Coleman Hughes talk about on that TEDx of last week, if affirmative action was based on class and ability to afford such opportunities and such, that would make more sense. That would be a better metric of someone's situation rather than a metric of their, biological condition. But yeah, if you're advantaging somebody else for reasons that have nothing to do with their merit or their circumstance, then that's not fair.
So in all circumstances here, they were penalizing individuals because of their race. So it went too far. The second part of the decision or basis of the decision was that the practices stereotype people.
Well, yes, it does that. It's done that the entire time. I mean, it's not as if the conditions surrounding affirmative action suddenly came into focus this year. The mechanisms have been the same as they've been the entire time. It's just that finally you had a Supreme Court who was willing to call a spade a spade. It's just like, that is what it is. It's racial discrimination. It's unfair. That's it. Long and the short. It is inherently discriminatory. It's inherently unfair, and it inherently violates the law.
The court said when a university admits students on the basis of race, they're engaging in offensive and demeaning assumptions that people of a particular race all think alike. And
well, either all think alike or are all suffering from the same condition of disparity or lack of ability or lack of opportunity or whatever else. But sure, it also, extends to that as well.
And they said that would violate the Equal Protection Clause.
Sure.
And then the third element of that decision was that the practices didn't have an expiration date.
Yeah, that was the other one too. It was supposed to be for a limited time. And there was some logic to this. And I've said this before, I can kind of understand the intent behind affirmative action in the early days, right? Because you've had a country that up until Civil Rights Act of 1964 operated legally in many states on a demonstrably and explicitly racist basis. No pun intended, or no poetry intended there, but I got it anyway. And so once you've made that admission that you've been doing it that way, once you've tried to make that correction with the Civil Rights Act, all right, now and into the future, you're not allowed to operate that way. But there can be no denying that damage has been done and the effects of it continue to affect people, even in the aftermath of the Civil Rights Act. So how do you try to correct or course correct in the short term to try to make up for what has happened, at least within a reasonable scope? And so affirmative action in the early days after the Civil Rights Act, I think, made moral sense. It might not have made sense against the law at the time or as it developed, but in a moral sense, in conjunction with the Civil Rights Act, it was logical. So for a limited time to try to, like I say, balance the scales a little bit, try to, as well as draw a line saying that after this point, thou shalt not pass a law that discriminates on race, at least for an interim probationary period, we're going to try to put into practice what the world would have been like if this law had been in place for a while to try to make up for some lost time. So to that extent, affirmative action in the immediate aftermath of the Civil Rights Act made some sense. And even if somebody said, well, let it run for 20 years on a clock to try to have people, catch up or have the world catch up to the laws that's been passed, okay. But it just kept going and going and going and going, Energizer Bunny style, until even a Supreme Court decision said, I should probably have about a 25-year clock on it. And that was about to pass out too. And the Supreme Court just said, why wait? What's different now that's going to be different tomorrow? Nothing. So let's just let it go. But anyway.
I mentioned the Fisher case, the Bollinger case. Those date back to 2003.
Yep.
And at that point, the court said that race-based admission programs for students were lawful in certain circumstances, but that they must someday come to an end, and that permanent racial preferences would not be permissible under the Constitution.
Yeah, and so they kind of give a vague time period.
And they specifically said, we expect in 25 years from now that racial preferences would no longer be necessary. So fast forward almost 25 years, at least 2 decades, and both Harvard and UNC said that there was no end in sight to their race-conscious admission programs.
Right. It'll never end. The work never ends. We'll have to keep correcting forever, which doesn't make any sense. Yeah, at a certain point, enough's enough.
So without any kind of meaningful endpoint, the court said that process was unconstitutional.
Yep.
And Chief Justice Roberts wrote the decision for the court. And I think that second to the last bullet point here on the slide, I think that's the most quoted portion of the decision when he said, eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it.
Which is absolutely true. Either you don't do it or you allow it in some circumstances. Either it's all bad or only kind of bad. Right? Again, being a little pregnant. Thank you, Angelverse, for the, I can't see what he's writing, we're number 1 or something. Dog, cat, fox? Well, either way, it is a dog, cat, fox.
Wowie, wow, wow.
There's a ranting monkey, dog, cat, fox. Thank you so much, Angelverse. Hope you're having a good evening. Also, good evening, Roan Harushan, You're Ridiculous Lunatic, Zed the Snarky, Advocatus Diaboli, Shadow Sonata, Resolute Germ, the original shroom. Good evening.
And then one of the last tidbits from the court in the decision was that universities were not prohibited from considering a student's discussion about race and how it impacted their life.
Right.
So long as they tied it in some way to the quality of their character or some unique skill, ability, or trait.
Right. It's not that you can't mention race as an applicant. It's not that the college can't consider elements of someone's life story, character, or ability based around an anecdote or some aspect related to their race. It's just that you can't say, oh, well, this person is more valuable because of their skin color. Now, you have to be able to demonstrate something about the individual's merit if it's going to be anything related to their race. It can't just be, I have skin color this, therefore let me in. And as a result of that, of course, and I've seen a couple of videos on this, and I haven't done anything on them yet, but I may in the future. We've seen several advisory individuals, especially on YouTube, telling people like, here's how to craft your diversity statement. Because that's still something that colleges will accept, a diversity statement or your cover letter or something. And so you have to be creative. And I'm sure a lot of students are being creative now to let the colleges know, this is my race and it relates to a thing about my life because X, Y, Z, P, D, Q. And, you know, the college can't just consider race, but if you give them a whole bunch of padding around your race, yeah. So even though affirmative action is legally gone, the colleges are going to be doing everything they can to still simulate it without being caught, like California has been doing since the 90s.
So how does that Supreme Court decision impact employers?
Well, it doesn't. It affects Title VI. Well, unless you're an employer who accepts federal funding under a federal contract or something. Other than that, if you are an employer, technically, affirmative action for colleges doesn't affect you because obviously you're not employing people on the basis of their race, right? Right, employers? Because that's Title VII. The Supreme Court decision was about Title VI. But okay, yeah, how does it impact employers?
That's the you know, for my practice group, for our firm, we focus on employment law.
Yeah.
So that was really the significant or salient issue for us. How does it impact employers?
Well, I'll be curious to see if she addresses the idea that DEI, starting with diversity, and the argument that the colleges used to justify their racial discrimination policies was based entirely around diversity as the positive outcome. Setting aside whatever legal precedents they were, they had to try to prove that there was some kind of justification for continuing to do affirmative action, and their argument was diversity. Didn't work, didn't pass constitutional muster, shot down. Since DEI starts with diversity, and diversity inherently involves discriminating employment, promotion, and recruitment on the basis of race and or gender, which, by the way, both have equal footing in law under Title VII and Title VI. They all appear in the same sentence. Race, gender, religion, ethnicity, country of birth, and so on. They all have equal footing. So if you're discriminating on one, you're liable for all the others. And so I'll be curious to see if she talks about the implications for employment DEI programs based on the decision in affirmative action. Because if a company gets drawn up for violations of Title VII, and the very program they have is called diversity, equity, and inclusion, anybody taking those guys to task just has to hold up the Supreme Court decision on the Title VI question for colleges, and they don't have much of a leg to stand on.
Well, the two laws at issue were the 14th Amendment and Title VII.
Title VI.
The 14th Amendment only applies to governmental employers.
It does?
Not private employers.
Oh.
But Title VI does apply to companies that receive federal financial assistance.
Right. So if you're a federal contractor or somehow otherwise receive a supplement from the government, yeah, then you're liable as well under the Supreme Court's decision. If you are discriminating in your employment on the basis of race, which of course you're not, right?
So certainly any employers covered by those laws would either be prohibited from using race in making employment decisions, or they would need to make sure they could satisfy that strict scrutiny analysis. But employers were already prohibited from using race in making employment decisions.
Yes, weren't they? So tell me about DEI initiatives.
Both Title VII and the Executive Order 11246 that apply to federal contractors both already prohibit the use of race in making employment decisions. And I have noted there are some very rare situations where.
Well, you'd be forgiven for thinking that that isn't the case, given how many major companies, DEI executives, chief operating officers, and on that I have looked at over the last 7 years, who over and over and over again say in no uncertain terms that they have specific quotas based around demographic, that they specifically try to partner with vendors on the basis of the race of the owners of those companies, and on and on and on. If it was illegal, if they were really scared of consequences for making employment and business decisions on the basis of race, I it would boggle my mind to think that that was true.
Where employers could. That's outside the scope of today's discussion. But generally speaking, this wasn't a new legal principle for employers.
You're right. It's not a new legal principle, but they sure as heck seem to have ignored it with the whole DEI scheme, haven't they?
They're already prohibited from using race.
Except that they do.
And to clarify, we talk about federal contractors being affirmative action employers. And this decision did not have an impact on that aspect of their compliance obligations. Affirmative action for federal contractors is focused on their recruitment efforts and ensuring that they have diverse candidate pools.
Right. Yeah. You put the discrimination at far at the front as you can before you actually have a face-to-face interview. And then you can avoid the more direct legal problems. Yeah, that's about as safe as you can do it when it comes to your discriminatory practices, is where you advertise the job openings, where you try to gather up the people to apply for the job. Because once they get into the office to go to that interview, that is where the line is decidedly drawn. If you start making decisions after that point on the basis of race or gender or whatever else, then you got a problem, which so many companies have told us time and again, specifically and explicitly, that is what they are doing with their goals and their quotas. So yeah, you can get away with it on the recruitment side, but you can't get away with it after the fact, except for everybody does.
Not about preferences for quotas or making employment decisions based on race. Again,
sure.
The executive order prohibits that. So for employers that were not making race-conscious decisions or decisions based on other protected categories, the Supreme Court's decision likely didn't affect your practices.
Yeah, except Title VII should be affecting the DEI practices left, right, and center. Except it's not, apparently, or at least not to the extent it should.
But what did change? Why are we even talking about this?
Right. Why are we talking about this? If the decision of the Supreme Court only affected colleges and federally contracted employers, and Title VII covers everybody else, and it was already illegal under Title VII to discriminate on the basis of race, whether you're an employer, a government contractor or not, why are we here?
Obviously, there's been a hullabaloo since the decision came out. But if the law didn't change, what did? And I think the answer to that is it's the perception.
The perception. Yeah, the perception that there's no longer any quasi-legal cover to discriminating on the basis of race for the sake of diversity. Right? The perception problem was on the side of the employers this entire time, wasn't it?
And here we have the pendulum swinging back the other way, as it often typically does. After George Floyd's murder in 2020, we
What does George Floyd have to do with this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's an empty box, Weaver.
Saw an immediate and intense focus on DEI and employers for a wide variety of solid, legitimate reasons.
No, not for solid, legitimate reasons. You had a giant gaggle of race opportunists calling themselves DEI consultants and jumping all over that man's corpse. Whatever he might have been otherwise, he was used in order for people to enrich themselves on the basis of a national guilt trip, especially when it came to DEI and a raft of other organizations and quote-unquote charities. That's what it was. Okay, that's what it was. It was an excuse. It was an excuse to implement ESG policies and derivative from that DEI policies as well. If we're going to be honest, let's be honest.
Need to make certain that they were staying competitive and doing the right thing, and there was an intense, deliberate focus and shift to make sure that they weren't just giving lip service to DEI programs.
Yeah, they had to make sure they tokenized as many people as possible to show how virtuous they were. It's true.
Became an important policy objective for employers. And so I think the Supreme Court decision has just refocused the attention of employers, employees, and as you'll see, various interest groups.
Interest groups being, a big part of it.
And I think one's opinion about DEI, as we're kind of looking through what's happened since the decision came out, I think one's opinion or view of DEI is based in large part on how you perceive or interpret it.
No, it's actually not how I perceive or interpret it. It's how it is told to me by the people in charge of making those decisions. Everything I know about DEI policies comes directly from the mouths of the people who advocate for it and use it within their business, right? Either as a consultant, as a situated officer within a company, or otherwise. That's it. Everything I know about it is from the words, from the mouths of people who are for it. And all of it is poison. All of it inherently requires discrimination on the basis of elements that are illegal to assess someone on for employment under Title VII. That is the long, that is the short. If there is any legal gray area wiggle room, it's a case-by-case basis, because I tell you what, and I've chronicled this so many times on here, and most of you know this, I've gone looking specifically for companies, major companies, that sit in interviews and on panel discussions and wait to hear them talk about percentages and quotas and diversity goals. Not aspirational diversity goals, things like 25 by 2025, or we want to have a workforce that's reflective of the communities we serve. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Or where they explicitly say, we want 30% women, we want 25% this, that, or the other. It's not about how I perceive it. It's how I am told it works. At least that's me. Maybe that's just my opinion.
If someone believes that DEI is about increasing diversity in a non-discriminatory manner,
then you would be ill-informed.
Ensuring equitable treatment.
Ensuring equitable treatment. How do you increase okay. I'm going back to the old days now. How do you define diversity? And then how do you achieve that without discrimination, without being inequitable, and assessing people on their demographic fit first and foremost? What is diversity in the workplace but a division of demographics, numbers, percentages, quotas? There's no avoiding it. Unless you've got an absolutely new definition for diversity as far as employment goes, there's no avoiding it. It's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of reality.
And fostering an atmosphere of inclusion, then they don't see any red flags around DEI.
Yes, because they have blinded themselves to it. They've decided to ignore the reality of what it is that they're doing and advocating for. That's all that is. And I'll grant you, it is a belief system. It is a faith-based system.
However, someone contends or assumes that DEI is about explicitly or implicitly using race or other protected characteristics to make employment-related decisions.
It is about that. It is. Again, define diversity and define for me what a non-diverse candidate looks like. And then explain to me how DEI is not inherently discriminatory on the basis of elements that are illegal under Title VII. That is the brief thought process that I would love to take someone who is for DEI and put them through. Have them describe to me what constitutes a non-diverse candidate. Let's see what list of adjectives come out from that question, if any at all, and then put those up against the law.
Then it's not surprising that they would find such practices objectionable.
Okay, wait, there's a apologies for those of you listening at home. There's a card up on the screen now. This is all one big PowerPoint presentation. The secondary statement says, is DEI about explicitly or implicitly using race or other protected characteristics, asterisk, to make employment-related decisions? Below that, note that there is no reverse discrimination against non-disabled people. I would like our speaker to look up the word ableist. Tell me about ableism. Or does that not fall within the legal lexicon yet? Because if it hasn't already, it will eventually.
Objectionable. And I think this is where there is a lot of disconnect around DEI.
Yes, there are people that are blinding themselves to the reality, and the people are being honest about what's going on.
I think the vast majority of employers do the former here and not the latter.
Yeah, they lie to themselves and their employees and their investors and everything. Yeah, they try to put the best spin on something that's demonstrably terrible.
Certainly in some cases, there are employers who might be using language around their DEI programs that's imprecise.
Imprecise? Imprecise. No. It's like I say, you can't avoid it. The only imprecise is if you fail to put the best spin on it. At that point, you're just being honest. That's about as imprecise as it's gotten in my experience.
Or mushy, and it might be interpreted in unintended ways. But I think the gist of DEI for most employers really has not revolved around using race or other protected characteristics in making employment decision.
Are you okay? I'll extend the benefit of the doubt. Our speaker is living in an alternate dimension, or is just in, denial is not just a river in Egypt. Employers are explicitly using race or other protected characteristics in making their employment decisions. I have video proof for you from Accenture, from Citibank, from HP, from Guitar Center, from PricewaterhouseCoopers, from the International Aviation Transport Association, and on and on and on and on and on. It's not a question. It's not a doubt. There's no room for maneuvering around this. It is absolutely true. So I hate to tell our speaker this, but she has been grossly misinformed.
And probably everybody on this call understands this, but I wanted to do just a quick, it's probably appropriate to do a quick primer on DEI.
Please do. I love primers on DEI. It's almost never the same thing twice.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
So that
what about belonging? No belonging, no access. I mean, DEIA or IDEA has been one of the new ones lately. They couldn't get belonging to stick, and so they decided to try access or accessibility. I mean, how many iterations have we had now? We had D&I, DEI, JEDI, DEIB, DEBI, at least in one instance, and then DEIA, and then IDEA. idea. It's an idea.
The diversity component represents the benefits of having diversity of race and gender.
What are the benefits of race and gender inherently? Do tell. What are the inherent benefits of someone's skin color? What are the inherent benefits of someone's gender? What can you expect to gain from someone that looks a particular way? You were talking about stereotypes earlier. You'd like to expand on that?
Background.
Yeah, it's funny how background becomes the tertiary mention in this, because in the olden days, background was one of the first things they said. They used to bury race and gender and orientation about 6th or 7th down on the list. First, they started up talking about background and experience and ways of thinking and everything else. And then eventually they'd start mentioning the things that really mattered.
Thought, a variety of things in your workplace.
Yeah. And how does any of that relate to someone's race or gender? How?
The equity aspect refers to ensuring that employees are treated fairly.
No, it ensures that employees are treated equally as far as outcome. That's it. That there's no fail state, especially for someone who's from a protected group. That's not equality. That's equity. If it was equality, they'd say equality. They don't say equality. Equality is like a 4-letter word in this sphere of the world now. No, equity. Everybody reaches the same result. That's what that means. Equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity.
Without regard to any protected characteristics.
No, it all starts with diversity. It is all fruit of the poison tree after that first letter. Once you filled up the diversity quotient, everything else is a question mark. Did that person get that job on the basis of their merit? Don't know. Did they end up in that position? Did they end up getting that promotion? Did they end up getting that project on the basis of their merit? Don't know. That's the problem. Same problem they had with affirmative action.
And then the inclusion element signifies a work environment where employees feel accepted and that they can be themselves at work and still feel that they belong.
Bring your whole self to work, your authentic self to work. There shall be no barriers between your personal life and your working life.
That's in a nutshell what DEI is.
Yeah.
And there's nothing inherently unlawful about those concepts.
Those concepts? No. Now, describe the mechanisms used to fulfill them, especially that first one, because I couldn't care less about the equity and inclusion part. At that point, you might be in the most gray area of the whole legality question. The question is, how do you achieve the diversity element? By what process do you fill out your workforce in order to achieve diversity?
So what happened after the Supreme Court decision? Did anyone else get whiplash as a result of the various reactions that happened?
No, I totally expected what happened to happen, honestly. I mean, as far as the court making the decision that it made, I wasn't sure about that. I wasn't sure how sweeping their decision would be leading up to it. I thought it was entirely possible because the Supreme Court, unlike what we've been told over and over and over again, doesn't necessarily swing based purely on the political leanings presumed to be each justice's realm. So I thought it might have been a much narrower decision. I only, like, if I had to say percentage-wise, since we're talking percentages here, I figured it was about a 75% chance it would be a narrow decision that still allowed affirmative action to take place, but with far more restrictions on it in some way, shape, or form. There was about a 25% chance in my mind that the court would just abolish it outright. I was hoping for an absolute abolishment. I wasn't expecting it necessarily, but I was happy when it happened. But I knew exactly what the fallout was going to be. I predicted it. I said it early on before they even got to the decision, before they even made it. After I heard the arguments before the Supreme Court, I said, man, if they get rid of affirmative action, watch every business with a DEI program go running for the hills because they'll have nothing to protect them. They'll either do one of two things. Either they got to get rid of DEI entirely to try to save themselves from future legal action, or they're going to have to double down on some sort of like moralistic crusade. And what has happened? Exactly that.
You'd see one response, and then you'd see another one that was the complete opposite, and it was hard to keep up with the various interpretations and commentary that occurred. So let's walk through some of them.
Okay.
Give you a quick overview.
Oh, the EEOC. I don't think I ever read a statement from the EEOC, and that really should be the agency that should have been cracking down on DEI this entire time, and only rarely does.
On the same day as the Supreme Court's decision, the chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Charlotte Burrows, issued a statement basically saying that this decision doesn't have any effect on employers.
I think I would argue it does. I would argue it does. And there are people currently filing and pursuing lawsuits against companies that have DEI programs. I think Charlotte Burrows was being far too optimistic because, again, like I say, what was the college's argument for the benefit of affirmative action? The diversity benefit. Diversity is the justification for making decisions in applications and admissions on the basis of race. And the Supreme Court said, amongst other things, that does not wash. 14th Amendment, Title VI, diversity. These things do not hold up an argument for affirmative action. So if your program in your business to try to achieve diversity is going to involve a quota, and they often do, you are already in trouble, but now you're doubly in trouble.
Your DEI programs are still lawful.
No.
Now, of course, that's not a statement by the commission.
That's not a law that was passed. That's not the EEOC saying, yeah, you can continue doing stuff. Yeah, that's just a statement by the chair.
That's just this one commissioner's comment on it.
Yes, very good. Okay, credit to Kara. Credit to our speaker. She pointed out the non-legally binding nature of that statement.
But you have seen, or I have seen employers relying on that statement and defending their programs.
Wait. Are you saying that people defending DEI are relying on statements of opinion rather than established law? You mean sort of like how affirmative action was? Sort of like Roe v. Wade was? Oh my gosh, can you believe it?
I would note that the statement is rather vague. And yeah. I don't think it should be necessarily interpreted as a stamp of approval on any and all DEI programs.
As if it ever could be without a decision by a court or a law passed by Congress. You're correct. You're absolutely correct. The statement from the EEOC doesn't mean, or that lady at the EEOC doesn't mean anything.
On the flip side of that, we saw EEOC Commissioner Andrea Lucas come out. And I wouldn't say that she opposed all DEI programs, but she seemed to take the position that some employers have pushed the envelope too far.
Push the envelope too far. You mean by doing public speaking tours and interviews where they say in no uncertain terms that they have quotas for hiring and promotion on the basis of race and gender? I've got several video examples. I can offer some up to the EEOC if they want some. I have in the past tagged the EEOC in a couple of my videos or a couple of examples on the off chance they might pay attention. Yeah, but no luck so far as I know.
She made statements along the lines of any kind of race conscious and equity focused policies are indefensible.
As currently rendered under law and common agreement after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I would certainly say so.
And there are employers that are doing that. She said many employers in the past few years have tried to achieve equity instead of equal opportunity.
Yes.
And I don't want to belabor this point, but in my opinion, achieving equity is a good thing. That just means treating people fairly.
No, then why do you say equity and not equality? Why use the word equity and not equality under common understanding? If it's the same thing, why don't you use the other word?
It's aiming for equality that can pose problems because you can't treat everyone the same.
Yes, you can treat everyone the same. You give everybody the equal opportunity. You say the bar, no pun intended for the legal profession, the bar is here. If you can get above this bar, then you can continue. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you look like. Here is the standard. Meet this standard and you can advance. And above that will be the next bar. Can you advance beyond that? Yes, great. No, well, then you're exactly where you are before. What are you talking about?
We've got differences in compensation and
that's got nothing to do with equality of opportunity.
Benefits.
That's got nothing to do with equality of opportunity.
And positions.
Yeah, well, that has something to do with equality of opportunity and someone's inherent merit and skill. Equity would say someone should get that job whether they've earned it or not. That's the difference. I don't know if you know that is the difference, but that is the difference. And that goes straight back to what we're talking about with affirmative action. Someone being given an opportunity to advance, not on the basis of their skills or merit, but on the basis of a non-determinative factor and an assumption of weakness. That's equity. That's the equity that you're arguing for. That's not equality.
And accommodations, and the list just goes on and on.
I'm sure intersectionality could take a long time. It's true.
But of course, it is true that we do want to provide equal opportunity.
Does it? Because you're arguing for DEI. You're arguing for equity. You're not arguing for equal opportunity
to our applicants and employees.
You just said equality is bad. Treating everybody fairly, egalitarianism is not equality. What do you? Okay, anyway. Wait. Did she miss a bullet point there, or did I just hold on? Yeah, many employers in the past 2 years have tried to achieve equity instead of equal opportunity. Yeah. And you didn't make a distinction between the two. You just said that they were the exact same thing. They're not the exact same thing. Demonstrably not the exact same thing. Anyway.
We've also seen requests for commissioners' charges. The American First Legal Organization, which is led by senior members of the former Trump administration, including the former senior advisor, chief of staff, acting attorney general. They have been pushing the EEOC.
I thought you're going to be nonpartisan. What does their former employment have to do with anything? Okay.
To issue commissioners' charges against various organizations.
On what basis? What is their argument?
Obviously, it's no question what side of the political aisle these folks are on.
What side are they on legally? Based on the Supreme Court decision and the derivative logic from that decision towards Title VII and employers in general, what side of the law are they on?
But they have found public statements and policies by varying organizations, and they refer them to the EEOC, suggesting that they're violating Title VII.
As I have. So I guess I know which side of the quote-unquote political aisle I sit. It's the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, as we know, everybody, Title VII and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, completely a conservative endeavor. Boy, howdy, was the Civil Rights Act a conservative linchpin, wasn't it? Remember all those conservatives just wanting the Civil Rights Act in place at the time? Yeah. Okay. It through the looking glass territory. We know which side of the political aisle they're on. They're arguing for defending Title VII. And that's a conservative okay. What a tangled web we weave.
For example, the AFL alleges that Mars Company intended to achieve equal gender balance across its leadership teams.
Yeah. Did Mars make such a statement or put out any publications stating that fact? And might I ask, if such a statement, if such a goal was put out into the public square, are we not allowed to ask, well, how exactly would Mars achieve that goal? As I had the phrase that I have asked any number of times, and I've said it here before on this very stream, by what mechanism would they propose to achieve a gender balance? How could they possibly do that without employing gender discrimination in their hiring practices? Again, maybe it's the poverty of my imagination. Maybe there's some actual legal way to make that statement as your goal and find a way to do it without actually being discriminatory. I don't know. But if you're going to say you're going to do something like that, if you come out and say we have a 25% by 2025 goal or a 35% in the next 3 years goal or something like that, how is that not a quota? How is that not saying that you're employing discriminatory practices?
To increase representation of racial minorities by 40%, which it called a quota.
That is a quota. What is it not a quota? What would you call it?
They also alleged that Mars had a leadership program and opportunities that were only open to women and people of certain races.
Didn't they? I mean, I've got plenty of examples of other companies doing that. Is it so far afield that it's alleged? I have a feeling that there's been plenty of public statements. Boy, I wish I'd looked at Mars Company before all this. I never thought to look at Mars. I bet you it's not unalleged. I bet it is absolutely provable.
Just a side note.
Whoa. So you mentioned Mars. You don't go over the other ones? Okay, for those of you listening at home, there are several companies on here apparently that America First is going after. Mars, Hershey Company, Anheuser-Busch, and Starbucks. Now, Starbucks just had a little bit of a bruise to their ego, let's say, in the last couple of months, because a former employee sued them for racial discrimination and being fired because she was white. This was in the aftermath of that event that took place, back in 2018, I think, where I think it was a Starbucks in, was it Baltimore? Or somewhere on the East Coast. I'm forgetting now. Anyway, a couple of people at a Starbucks were asked to buy something or leave, because that was the company policy. And the two people told to buy something or leave were two black men. And then the cops were called, and it turned into this big thing. And then Starbucks was a racist organization, and yada, yada, yada. And in the aftermath of that, Starbucks had to find a fall guy, and they worked their way up away from every employee in a position of authority who wasn't white, because they couldn't fire somebody who wasn't white until they finally found this regional manager or something, and then fired her as a result of what happened at this Starbucks store. They couldn't fire the manager of the store because the manager of the store wasn't white. And she won her lawsuit. I think it's probably still being appealed or something, but all the same, yeah, Starbucks might have a problem.
And people of certain races. Just a side note here on commissioner's charges. This is an additional weapon in the EEOC's arsenal. So in addition to investigating discrimination charges filed by individuals,
yes,
Congress has authorized the EEOC to investigate possible discrimination using commissioner charges. So the individual commissioners can actually issue charges based on public information or information gathered during other investigations or other sources.
Oh, they're almost like employment cops. If only they did more work in that realm. I mean, I've heard of maybe 2 stories of any note in the last couple of years or few years where the EEOC actually acted on discriminatory practices in a business. And the ultimate result of that was just a fine. $1 million here, $3 million there, something like that. A rounding error for most of the companies that they went after. Not much of a disincentive. And as I've shown again and again and again and again on my channel, a lot of major companies don't care. They have no fear. They have no concern. They're more than happy to sit in a public forum and tell everybody to the roof and back that Yeah, we have a quota. We have a percentage that we're aiming for a particular demographic. And we're proud to say so. I'm really proud of the work we've done and this, that, and the other. There's no fear. The old t-shirts, no fear.
That they believe need to be investigated. Mm-hmm. And the charges aren't public, so we don't know whether the AFL's campaign to the EEOC has had any results.
It should be public. It should totally be public.
But I did find this interesting nugget on the EEOC's website. They do provide some general statistics on the issuance of of commissioners' charges over the past couple of years.
3, 3, and 29 in 2022. So 2020 there were 3, 2021 there were 3, 2022 there were 29. That is the right direction, but honestly, it should have been much higher, much earlier. This stuff is out there for anyone to see. You did not need either the advent or the onset of an affirmative action decision to see the evidence of this problem for years and years. I guess better late than never, but it boggles my mind how more of this was not happening earlier.
And you can see a pretty significant increase in fiscal year 2022. Yeah. In my experience, there are generally very few that are issued. So I think the 29 total issued by the EEOC in fiscal year 2022 is pretty significant.
Yeah, it is. And I can't wait to see what they've done in 2023.
And just for context, and for the government's purposes, fiscal year 2022 covers October 1, 2021 through September 30th, 2022. So that predates the Supreme Court's decision in late June of this year.
Good. Like I say, I can't wait to see what 2023 numbers are.
So I definitely think it will be interesting to see what the results or the stats from fiscal year 2023 and 2024 look like. That might give us some insight into whether or not they did follow the AFL's lead there. Mm-hmm. So other letter writing campaigns.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, the state attorney generals. Oh boy, yeah, the 13 Republican attorneys general, and then the response by the 21 or whatever Democratic attorneys general.
This is definitely the part that gave me whiplash. So just a couple weeks after the Supreme Court's decision, we saw 13 state attorneys general send a letter to the Fortune 100 CEOs. Yes. And these were states of the red persuasion, shall we say?
The red persuasion, shall we? Just say Republican state attorneys general. It's easy to say. Shall we say? Come on.
And they basically said, look, we know you're discriminating against people and you need to stop doing it.
Yeah. They're not wrong. If they're employing a DEI program, the likelihood is they are violating the law. There's at least a few companies on that list that I have public statements of in my archive. I don't know what to tell you. It's absolutely true.
They literally said racial discrimination is commonplace amongst your companies.
It is.
And as the chief law enforcement officers of our states, we're going to enforce the law vigorously.
Well, good.
That was obviously a few months ago. I am not aware of any state yet that has sued a company.
Which is unfortunate. They should, and they could easily start the process to do so. Again, none of this was undercover. And honestly, the absence of EEOC action and any legal entanglements taking place over the last 7 years alone emboldened those that worked for major companies in these positions of diversity officer or otherwise to say things in public without any fear of repercussions, and consequently end up providing damning evidence of the problem that needs to be addressed. I mean, if there's any plus to the EEOC and the government being asleep at the wheel, intentionally or otherwise, over the last several years, it's that there are reams of evidence of wrongdoing and public declarations that attorneys general could use state by state to start prosecution or start lawsuits against some of these companies. It's it's a smorgasbord if you're willing to look for it, and it's not hard to find.
For race discrimination, certainly if anybody is, you can put it in the chat and I'll share it with the group later. But I'm not aware of any lawsuits actually having been filed.
I hope it's not just hot air, honestly. Whether regardless of the political persuasion of the Attorney General in question, I hope it's not hot air. Something substantive, Irate Bear, really does need to happen. Not just this fear mongering, not just threats. There has to be concrete action taken to try to reverse course on this. Someone has to pay a price, and not a price in just a fine. If you can do no more than fine them under the law, it has to be as public a drubbing as possible.
And then just a couple days later, Senator Cotton of Arkansas sent a letter to 51 of the largest U.S. law firms, telling them you need to stop violating the law and discriminating against people, and you need to stop advising your clients in discriminating against people.
Yeah, because no law firm would employ any kind of discriminatory practice. Wait, O'Melveny and Myers, LLP. Yeah, I did a video on them. That was I think one of my last scripted videos before the world changed and I went to almost exclusively live streaming. Where they tell you in no uncertain terms it's a numbers game, achieving diversity, where they give you the statistics. They have all their officials come on and start telling you who is a diverse person and who isn't. Yeah, not only are law firms advising clients and protecting clients in these practices, they're employing them themselves oftentimes.
And then, not to be outdone, 21 state attorneys general, this time of the blue variety, responded or sent their own letter to the Fortune 100 CEOs. And they basically said you should ignore the letter that you got from those other states. Your efforts to recruit diverse workforces and create inclusive work environments are legal.
No. The letter from the 21 state AGs on the Democratic persuasion, they drew a legal distinction in their letter to try to give cover to DEI programs. They made a distinction between quotas, which are demonstrably and unavoidably illegal to employ, no pun intended, but I'll take it, in a business for employment purposes, and something they decided to call aspirational diversity goals. So if I say, I want to have a 50-50 gender equity parity in my senior workforce by 2025, that's not a quota. That's just an aspirational diversity goal. It's just an idea. It's not a declaration of an illegal counting system of people on the basis of their gender. No, it's just a thought. It's just a dream. That's what that letter. That's the only actionable or interesting thing in that letter, is that they tried to draw and define a legal distinction between those two things for any businesses and establish a legal defense for future litigation, which I'm not a lawyer, but I'll tell you, if somebody puts in front of me what is a percentage goal for a particular demographic in a workforce and tells me that's not a quota, that's just an aspirational goal, if I was a judge, I would laugh in their face.
And they help you reduce your risk of claims for discrimination.
DEI programs reduce your risk for claims of discrimination? Really? If you say so.
Basically told them you need to double down on your DEI program.
Yes, double down.
So what's an employer to do, right?
I don't know. Follow the law. How about follow the law? The law that was not affected by the affirmative action decision. The law that's been in place since 1964. Title VII makes it pretty plain. And the few exceptions there are to Title VII are so narrow that you'd have to have a team of lawyers double checking everything every day forever to make sure you weren't violating it.
When you get these conflicting messages.
Yes. What do you do?
And then A month or so after that, there was another letter from 5 state attorneys general to the AmLaw 100, top 100 size law firms in the country, warning them to stop violating the law by discriminating and using their DEI programs. And I attached this, the last item here on August 30th was a written opinion from the Kentucky Attorney General about their state's governor's minority management training program. The Attorney General there found that the program that they had in place was unlawful because participation in it was limited to minorities.
Oh, so it was a racially discriminatory governmental program. Demonstrably so. In its own title, you say. Amazing, isn't it? Not even a state governor felt any fear about implementing such a thing.
State legislatures are also focusing on DEI practices, and I think that will only continue to increase after the Supreme Court's decision.
Yes.
It kind of began, I think, with the Florida Stop Woke Act.
Stop Woke Act. Oh, man. Florida, such a test bed for things that'll probably get shot down in the courts, but at least your intentions are pure.
I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. This actually predated the Supreme Court's decision, and it was clearly modeled after and reminiscent of President Trump's executive order for contractors that prohibited training on divisive topics. Some of the language it seemed to be pulled from that executive order, which, by the way, was rescinded on day one of the Biden administration.
Yeah, still, it makes the point. And Biden rescinding it doesn't change the point of it. He didn't suddenly bless the entire process for anybody that thinks about it for more than 5 minutes.
But it's aimed at prohibiting employers from having mandatory training topics that teach people that they are, inherently superior or inferior to someone because of their race.
Yes. And Biden rescinded that, right?
Or that they should feel guilt or privilege because of their race.
Yes. And I wonder if our speaker knows companies were actually doing that in their programs. Did you know that? That's not some flight of fancy. That's not some conspiracy theory. That is part and parcel with many DEI training programs. Do you know that?
Or gender, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But significantly, a federal court has enjoined enforcement of this law on First Amendment grounds. So
that is the problem with it. If a company hires somebody to give training on something, and it's speech, it's opinion, right? The only question is whether or not, in the course of having that training program, you are effectively implementing a discriminatory business environment or business practice. And that has to be done on a case-by-case basis with its own evidence and so on and so forth. So passing a law saying you can't say these things, no good. No good. But if you can show evidence that the company followed through on a training program, or that a training program instructed employers or employees to do things that fall outside the law, that should be looked at for sure. So yeah, like I say, got rescinded, fine, point was made, question and discussion is out there, thankfully.
It's not in effect at the moment. We've seen states take aim at DEI, particularly at public institutions. Texas passed a law that terminates the DEI offices at their public universities.
Because they're inherently discriminatory. I mean, you can slap a friendly label on it, but the function of those DEI offices was discrimination, was valuing people at colleges and universities on the basis of things that they're not allowed to do. And it goes right back to Title VI. DEI programs, I mean, if you want to talk about affirmative action, DEI programs are the exact same thing as affirmative action in colleges. It might not be in the admissions process, but it permeates through everything else at a public institution that accepts federal funding and thus falls under Title VI. And you can't discriminate in activities or resources or anything else on the basis of race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, country of origin, etc. So a DEI office on a public university campus is an inherent Title VI risk.
So it prohibits the use of DEI statements in their hiring practices, outlaws DEI training requirements, and prohibits compelling students or employees to endorse some kind of racial ideology.
Yes.
We are seeing other states that have passed or are considering similar DEI laws. This has all been happening fast and furiously. So these are the ones I was aware of about a month ago. It might even need to be updated since then.
Yeah, and this is the same thing or same problem that we ran into. Like Ranting Monkey and I several months ago looked at some proposed legislation out of Florida regarding their anti-diversity, equity, inclusion law or policy or statute or whatever. And the problem with the language of the proposal, at least at that time, was that it was too vague. It said things to the effect of, no organization on campus shall talk about diversity or equity or inclusion. And I'm like, you can't outlaw the words. If someone is talking about the diversity of the fauna in the Amazon jungle in a biology class on campus, you can't then throw that person in jail or fine them. It was way too vaguely written. And I don't think there's going to be a single law that deals with this. You've got to take every individual organization that makes use of these practices and have them looked at, have them investigated, have the content of their organizational character assessed up against the law as currently stands. You don't need new laws for DEI. That's the part that has boggled me throughout this entire thing. You don't need to pass a new law. It's already sitting right there. It's Title VII. It's the illegality of quotas. If you can show that those things are being violated by companies and other organizations, you're done. So all these states trying to pass laws to ban DEI, I'm like, dude, the fundamental problem with DEI is already covered under the law. You just have to enforce it. You just have to get the governmental organization in charge of things like that to enforce it. The EEOC exists for this. Get them more funding, get them more resources to do their job, to look at more companies that make these statements. A lot of time and a lot of money would be saved doing that rather than passing these vague and probably going to be defeated on appeal laws in all these states. It's true.
But you can see where the trend is heading. So, and what are we seeing in the courts? DEI lawsuits?
Not much so far, although the same guys behind the affirmative action lawsuit are pursuing several other companies, as you've already said, Anheuser-Busch and et cetera. Or is that a separate organization? I might be off on that.
We're seeing lawsuits by investors, and I call this the damned if you do, damned if you don't area, because we're...
Yeah, it really is. Employers that use DEI stuff are really stuck now, right? If they drop their DEI initiatives altogether, then they're effectively admitting fault to everything they were doing previously under that rubric, right? If anything they were doing in DEI, they're now running from completely, well, now you're setting yourself up for liability issues. If you stick with it, you're only opening yourself up more and more in perpetuity to legal problems. There's no way out. Now that people are being attentive to this stuff, as they should have been the entire time, companies that have gone all in on this have a decision to make. Either they continue opening themselves up to further prosecution in the future, or they admit a fault and take the L and hope that nobody sues them too much in the meantime. But that's their own fault. I have no sympathy for any company trying to make that decision. It's all funny to me.
Seeing lawsuits from investors that are suing because companies aren't doing enough on the DEI front. And then we're seeing lawsuits by investors claiming that their DEI initiatives are too woke and are unlawful. Wells Fargo, for example.
Why do you have to put woke on there? Why don't you just put unlawful? Why don't it violate the law? Why do you sort of like try to dilute it with buzzwords? It demonstrably violates Title VII.
Was sued by a pension fund for allegedly failing to properly implement a diversity search for highly paid employees as they had promised to do. Danaher was sued by an investor alleging that the company breached its diversity goals because it didn't have a single Black board member.
So wait. They had a quota for how many board members they were going to have. Now, boards on companies are a little bit different. They don't depending on the circumstance, they don't necessarily fall under Title VII because it's kind of a different dynamic with employment, but all the same, you guys don't have enough of the right color people on your board of directors. Let's think about that for a second, shall we? Let's think about that. He wasn't asking for someone with experience. He wasn't asking for somebody with knowledge or merit. No. The first consideration was aesthetic. Is this not sending up red flags to anybody else in that realm of things? Or even our speaker? I mean, I understand she's trying to be quote unquote nonpartisan, but really, a cigar is sometimes just a cigar, right? He's talking about he wants the company to be racist in favor of particular skin colors. Come on.
On the flip side, we saw a lawsuit against Starbucks alleging that its DEI practices were woke and unlawful, and that complaint was pretty quickly summarily dismissed.
Oh, really? Tell me about the lady who got fired for being white. Really? I mean, their DEI, trust me, Starbucks is a big enough company. That's not the first and that's not the last lawsuit that's going to come Starbucks' way in this regard. Trust me.
By, I believe it was court in Washington.
Oh, well, a court in Washington. Yeah, you want to talk about a liberal state. Yeah, just wait. Just you wait. There's a lot of Starbucks across this country.
We are seeing significant jury verdicts in this
Yes.
area.
Oh, she's actually bringing it up. Good. I wasn't just making things up out of whole cloth here.
You probably remember just a few months back this $25 million jury verdict for
Philadelphia. That's what it was.
The Starbucks manager, white Starbucks manager, who alleged that she was unfairly punished and terminated after the very high-profile arrest of Black men at the Starbucks location in Philadelphia.
Yes.
She claims to have been made a scapegoat and suffered mental and emotional anguish as a result of that.
And a jury agreed with her, didn't they?
The jury certainly sided sided with her in those arguments.
Yeah.
Also,
you're just going to hand wave over that? Okay, so Starbucks, their DEI program is totally fine because the Washington court said there was it struck it down. Okay, well then this jury gave a girl $25 million for being racially discriminated against. But we'll move on now. I don't know.
Recently, we saw a $10 million jury verdict in North Carolina by a white male executive alleging that he had been terminated by his organization and then replaced with a Black female.
Oh, wow.
As part of as part of the evidence, he relied on the company's diversity and inclusion plan and a review of various demographic data as evidence of the company's discriminatory motive. That jury award was reduced to $4.6 million, and it's currently on appeal to the Fourth Circuit. So remains to be seen what ultimately will happen with that matter.
Okay.
These next few slides, and I'll probably move through them fairly quickly.
Okay, well then I'll read them out loud so we don't miss anything. American Express, Amex sued for reverse discrimination. There's no such thing. It's just discrimination, whatever. Class action dismissed to arbitration. Complaint alleged. Quotas for black workers. I can believe it. And managers were required to reduce number of white employees and received financial incentives for doing so. I could believe that too. After looking at corporate diversity videos and panel discussions for the last 7 years, I could believe all of that. Is that the case in American Express's situation? I don't know for a fact. Haven't seen the evidence. But all things considered, on a general corporate level of DEI practices, I could believe it, especially the quota part. As far as the financial incentives, yeah, I've heard those things too, but certainly the quota side.
Just out of an interest of time, but again, you'll be sent a PDF version of the slides. But we're seeing examples of lawsuits that where companies are being sued based on some aspect of a DEI program or alleged reverse discrimination.
There's no such thing as reverse discrimination. I'm assuming our speaker is a lawyer. She works for a law firm or has some experience in legal practice. There's no such thing as quote unquote reverse discrimination. There's just discrimination. It's not reverse. If you're assessing someone's value on the basis of their skin color and making decisions on that basis, it's just discrimination. Reverse discrimination is a nonsense term.
And I've included them here, not so much for purposes of showing what not to do, but rather for what we're seeing being filed in court.
Not for purpose of not what to do. So wait, American Express, they had quotas for black workers, allegedly, and they gave financial incentives to managers to hire people on the basis of their race, allegedly. Companies shouldn't do that. I mean, even if the charges against American Express are completely false, let's just take the bullet points as they are. Companies should not do that. That's not some kind of goofy legal advice thing where you have to worry about someone taking your advice and moving on and then suing it. No, that is the law. That is the law. What? Okay, this isn't what employers shouldn't do. Like, really? So they should do this?
Most of these matters are still in the preliminary stages, and we only have the allegations from the complaint.
Right, but the allegations alone, taken by themselves and separate from any connection to the lawsuit, those are things that companies should not do, right? Have quotas for workers on the basis of race and having bounties for managers for hiring people on the basis of race. You wouldn't say those are things that employers should do, right?
And so with any complaint, whether there's validity to the allegations remains to be seen. But again, I thought these examples would provide some insight into what claims are being filed, what practices are being challenged. So there's this class action against Amex that has since been dismissed to arbitration, but the allegations were that the company had quotas.
It's unfortunate that it was dismissed to arbitration. It should have gotten a public hearing. It should have had a whole layout of the facts. And now it's going to be, under the cloak of conference rooms and allegations and probably non-disclosure agreements and God knows what else.
For black workers, and that managers were required to reduce the number of white employees and allegedly received financial incentives for doing so. A recent class action against Gannett.
Oh yeah, I read this somewhere. Yeah.
Alleging unfair treatment, preferential treatment for minority candidates.
Which again, check out my channel and my video on O'Melveny, the O'Melveny method. Everything I see on this bullet point list, as far as I can tell, is matched in some way, shape, or form by the public statements from officers and employees at O'Melveny. So this in law firms and such is not uncommon. Probably a lot more common than they probably want to admit.
In hiring and compensation, there's the allegation that managers were instructed not to hire any more straight white males. And then also an allegation that someone was told to rescind a job offer after failing to find a qualified minority candidate and was retaliated against after protesting that policy.
Okay.
We're going to talk about diverse slate policies in a little bit. And I don't think that it's necessarily unlawful. It's going to depend on what the practice is.
You don't think it's necessarily unlawful. Okay, but it could be.
But I think in general, having a practice to say, hey, we want to make sure we've done good recruitment and have a diverse pool of candidates. There's nothing necessarily unlawful in general with that type of practice.
Okay, again, as I said before, and I've learned over the years, the creating the candidate pool process, where you advertise job openings, where you recruit in order to bring people in for that initial interview, that entire element of employment, again, that is about as distant as you can get and still employ a discriminatory philosophy without violating the law. Once they get in front of someone for an interview and the process for anything after that fact, if there's any declarations of quotas, if there's any processes internally for advancement or opportunity or everything else, you're in deep trouble. If you ever, again, state a quota, you're already in deep trouble. But yeah, if you do a recruitment drive at a specific college because that college has a predominantly whatever demographic you're looking for population, and you increase the odds that the people coming to apply to your firm, to your company, to your organization will be from that demographic based on where you cast the net, so to speak. That is, to this point, legal. But it definitely brings up questions of what happens after that point in companies that say they have DEI practices. If a company did that and they had no DEI initiative, if they didn't have anything internally going on, if they didn't state quotas, they'd be in safe territory. It'd be very difficult to say anything else was going on without very explicit evidence of individual case-by-case basis. But by declaring a DEI initiative and program in your company, you are effectively admitting across the board and in multiple instances, you are assessing people coming into your company on the basis of things that are illegal. So that's the trap they find themselves in now. All the virtue signaling in the world and saying you have a DEI program, probably not going to be worth it in the end.
The lawsuit against Morgan Stanley. Again, this individual was terminated and claimed that he was replaced by a less experienced Black female to achieve diversity goals. And you can kind of see a theme that is evolving here.
Yeah, it's almost as if there's rampant discrimination taking place in multiple companies, right?
Seen a lot of these cases arise from an employee that's been separated, and they are alleging that their separation was based, at least in part, on the company's desire to achieve diversity goals.
Oh, you skipped over that card pretty quick. Let's go back a second here. Morgan Stanley, male exec, alleges he was terminated because he is white and replaced by less experienced Black female to achieve diversity goals. Former exec alleges that he was involved in planning for RIF, but four of individuals selected based on performance were not laid off because they were quote unquote diverse. I don't know what RIF is off the top of my head. That's something that doesn't come to my mind. But yeah, again, I want to find an advocate for DEI and ask them what constitutes a non-diverse candidate.
Out of Texas was interesting, and I noted it because the district court's opinion denying the employer's motion for summary judgment.
Wait, I jumped over something here. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. I didn't want to. I cut her off by jumping around on the cards. Let's try that again. Come on, play.
To achieve diversity goals. This case out of Texas was interesting.
Okay.
And I noted it because the district court's opinion denying the employer's motion for summary judgment opened with just some really language that was right on point. And I wrote it down, so I'm going to read it to you.
Okay.
The opinion opens with, "This lawsuit raises a question many companies are struggling to answer."
Oh, does it? And what question is that? And by the way, as far as I can tell, that the quotation she is reading right now is not on the card, so I have to listen to it.
What steps can a company take to encourage the promotion of women or underrepresented minorities without discriminating against men or individuals outside the protected class?
Yes, that is the question that they've been trying to answer, at least as long as I've been doing my channel. And consistently, as far as I can tell, those companies that I've looked at, failing at. Because, again, if someone's come up with a method otherwise, by all means, I'd love to hear it. But if you say, we need more of this type of person in our company, and we're setting a goal for that, I'm not quite sure how else you would achieve that without discriminating on the employment level for who gets into your company. If it's all about the aesthetics, there's only one way to get there, and it's to rig the game.
I mean, that just sums up this whole conundrum in a nutshell. But so the court looked at that question and then looked at the evidence that was presented and denied summary judgment to the employer. And in this case, the individual lost his position. It was a male employee, lost his position during a restructuring, applied for several openings, all of which were filled by women. And he pointed during the summary judgment briefing to a variety of diversity and inclusion efforts, including goals set for women.
Goals set for women. You're going to talk about the percentage goal year over year, the quota. Goal to increase representation of women globally by 3% each year. That doesn't equate to a quota.
Significant increase in the percentage of hiring for women.
And over in the chat real quick, thank you. You're ridiculous lunatic. RIF, reduction in force. Thank you. I'm not so corporatized that I understand some of these snazzy little buzzwords and phrases. Thank you.
Alleged direction from leadership, urging managers to leverage their transformation during the restructuring to accelerate their gender balancing goal.
Okay, seriously, I want the speaker to pause for a second and say, that does sound like a quota, doesn't it? Talking about percentages of demographic. Come on.
And so forth.
And so forth? Okay, you're going to skip over this? Okay, so here are the allegations. Goal to increase representation of women globally by 3% each year. Progress towards 3% goal considered in determining annual bonus pool. Objective to achieve gender-balanced workforce by 2025. 50% by 25. Okay. Percentage of women hired increased from 10.4% in 2016 to 60%. That's 60% in 2019 to 2020. KPIs on progress continually released to managers. Yeah. So like, here's your goal. Are you achieving the right hiring goals in women? During restructuring, leadership urged to, quote, leverage this transformation to accelerate progress, unquote, toward gender balancing goal. Court denied summary judgment, finding that evidence created factual dispute as to hiring explanations. And this case is called Powers v. Broken Hill Proprietary. Broken Hill. That's almost seems too appropriate.
And that case, by the way, appeared to have settled just a couple months after the denial of summary judgment.
In whose favor, might I ask?
So law firms are not immune to this.
You're right. Law firms aren't. Oh, I thought I don't know every law firm on the planet. When she cited something called Gannett earlier, I thought that was a law firm for some reason. If that wasn't a law firm, I apologize for comparing it to Old Melviny. But now you've got Perkins Coie and Morrison Forster. I did a video on Morrison Forster and their entire little problem too.
You probably heard recently about some challenges to law firms' training fellowship programs.
Yes.
And this is being spearheaded by the American Alliance for Equal Rights, which is an organization run by Steve Blum, who is behind the Students for Fair Admissions organization.
That's what it was. That was the connection to the affirmative action thing. Okay, so the previous former Trump officials thing. I don't know all the I don't have all the names memorized. So yeah, the organization that's a direct child organization, let's say, from the affirmative action case, they're the ones going after the law firms, and apparently Meta as well. What?
Organization that challenged the Harvard's and UNC's practices.
Yes.
But they are alleging that law firms' fellowships dedicated to minorities is unlawful discrimination.
On that score, I don't know if that's true or not. But if you are favoring some employees for opportunities in your company or in your law firm on the basis of their race, then
the two lawsuits here, the Perkins Coie and Morrison Forster, those have since been dismissed after the firms changed their criteria.
Yeah, that was the fun part. Morrison Forster ran for the hills. They dropped it as immediately as it was questioned. As soon as it was questioned, they rescinded the entire program. I still think they should be taken to task for the violations that occurred during the course of the program's existence. I don't see how that's still not a litany of violations that need to be investigated. But at least on the plus side, they're not going to be doing it anymore. So, I mean, it might be the thinnest of silver linings, but it's there.
For eligibility for their fellowship programs. Since then, though, they've gone after a couple other law firms. We just recently saw, it was either yesterday or late last week, a lawsuit against Winston & Strawn, who appears to be ready to defend their program.
Oh, good. Take it to court. Yeah, don't run away. Don't. So yeah, company's got two options. They can either drop it and run for the hills, or they can double down and go forward. And I'm glad that at least one of them seemingly is going forward, because I can't wait for the disclosures on that one if it actually goes to trial.
They do use the terms disadvantaged and historically underrepresented as criteria for qualifying.
Yeah, it's very couched language for race and or gender, depending on the circumstances, mostly.
For their scholarship, or I'm not sure if it's a scholarship or fellowship program, but they have pushed back, and they said, your understanding or belief that those terms necessarily refer to race is baseless.
Yeah, except for every other company on the planet using those terms as synonyms for racial minorities and women. I wish them luck. And let's look at the percentages of the recipients. Right? Let's take a look at the demographics of the recipients of those fellowships or scholarships. Let's see that come out in court.
And I think that's, potentially a good point.
I don't think it's a good point at all. I don't think it's a good point at all. Right? If I hold up a nuclear bomb and I say, this is a puppy dog, it doesn't change the nature of the thing I am holding up, does it?
If that's how it has worked in practice, arguably, I don't think you necessarily have to conclude that it would also exclude white men.
Well, like I say, I guess the proof will be in the pudding, right? Yeah, when the law firm has to offer up identifying and demographic information of those people that had received the benefits of the fellowship and or scholarship during the course of the program's run. I guess we'll see how that pans out. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe they did mean it in the most abstract and euphemistic way possible. I would be mightily surprised.
If we look at people's backgrounds and socioeconomic environments, that could potentially include those individuals as well.
It could. It's entirely possible. Can't wait to find out.
But in the lawsuit that was just recently filed, the plaintiffs are two straight white males who claim that they are being excluded.
I'm glad they're taking it to court. I'm glad they're going all the way.
And then this lawsuit against Meta is interesting as well. This is also brought by that American First Legal that we talked about earlier in the commissioner's charges slide. This lawsuit focuses on an apprenticeship program that, see if I can explain it succinctly. It's basically
I'll explain it succinctly. It's elevating people for opportunities in the company on the basis of their demographic fit. That's my guess.
For production companies, and they have this initiative, and it's called Double the Line. So for any single production budget, the signatories to this program agree that they will double a position and allocate and pay for the cost of an additional person on the production staff who is a person of color.
Well, at least there wasn't any abstracts or euphemisms there. It's very explicit. Okay, and you gave that other law firm you were just talking about plenty of room to maneuver in your assessment of the charge. And so, what do you have to say about this one?
So, by taking this pledge and signing on to this diversity initiative, they're basically agreeing to have a position that's
no, not basically. There's no basically about this. Isn't a technicality. There's no gray area here. You said it. Oops. There goes my phone going off. Ah, yes. It's 6:00. I get a regular text from work on stuff on that. Okay. Yeah. No, basically here. That's not basically. That's explicitly the case.
That's limited to minorities.
Yeah. And that's, again, let's back up a little bit so I can get the full statement. Come on.
Who is a person of color. So by taking this pledge and signing on to this diversity initiative, they're basically agreeing to have a position that's limited to minorities.
And have you anything to add to that?
And that's what's being challenged in those circumstances.
And you just move on. Okay, so when the language is couched and all fluffed up and purple prose and everything, you've got plenty of room to maneuver to offer to the law firm being sued in the one instance. But once an explicit declaration of racial discrimination comes down the pike, you got nothing else to say? Okay, if you say so, or not say so, as the case may be.
We're also seeing opposition to questionable practices result in claims of discrimination. And again, we're only going by the complaints here. We don't know what the actual facts are, but I noticed, I saw this lawsuit against Compass Group, who was sued by a recruiter who raised challenges to their Operation Equity program.
Operation Equity. Okay, well, it's pretty explicit.
This program offered special training and mentorship to women and people of color.
So it was a discriminatory employment opportunity. Okay.
And this recruiter claims that she raised concerns about that type of practice violating their non-discrimination policy.
Yes.
And her supervisor allegedly said, well, this is the direction the world is going, so jump on the train or get run over.
How funny. That's funny, isn't it?
We'll see how that one plays out.
This is the direction the world is going. Jump on the train or get run over. The direction the world is going. Discriminating on the basis of gender and skin color. As a good thing. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I know. I agree, though. Here's the thing. The supervisor isn't wrong. He isn't wrong. Or she isn't wrong, whoever it is. I don't know the gender of the supervisor. I'll be all inclusive here. They're not wrong. This is the direction the world has been going. And if you're not sticking to the game plan, you are in trouble. Or if you don't fit the game plan, you're in trouble. And that has been the case now for years. It's frustrating as all hell to me that only now is it being given some attention. Like I said before, I guess better late than never. My only question is, what will the results be? And will we finally see this entire DEI apparatus fall apart. Fingers crossed.
Another important issue is pending at the Supreme Court.
Okay.
That we should, it's pending. So next term, next year, hopefully we'll have an answer to the question of what is an adverse action within the meaning of Title VII.
Good.
This Muldrow versus City of St. Louis cert has been granted. And the issue or the question for the court is whether or not the transfer of an employee is discriminatory where it does not cause any significant disadvantage to the employee.
Transfer decision, absent a determination that the transfer decision caused a significant disadvantage. Okay, I'd like to know the basis of the case.
So you get moved to a different job, but no change in your compensation or benefits, or anything that we would typically consider to be a term or condition of employment.
Significant disadvantage. I guess it depends on what you mean by significant. If I get transferred to another job and it requires me to move to another city or takes me out of the running of the career I was pursuing or something else, I mean, I don't know. I guess, like I said, I have to see the basis of the case.
Is that sufficient to constitute an adverse action?
Depends.
In the Davis versus Legal Services of Alabama, cert is pending in that case. And the question there is similar. It's whether or not a paid suspension could be an adverse action under Title VII and Section 1981.
And unless there's something else going on, none of those cases have anything to do with race or gender or anything else. So I'm not quite sure how they relate directly to affirmative action. Unless you could show the motivation was race or I don't know.
And the issue of what is an adverse action or what constitutes an adverse action is significant because to the extent it defines what is a term, condition, or privilege of employment, it could impact the areas in which employers can make race or gender conscious decisions.
Well, that's okay. Granted, that's true too. I mean, if the motivation to move somebody from one job to another is because of their gender, their race, or whatever else, either as a punishment or as we need to change our numbers in this department to those numbers in order to achieve the goal. Yeah, I mean, if somebody's on an employment track, right, that they've been working in a particular department or with a particular group of people for years and years and years, and then you suddenly switch them to another job out of the blue without, reasonable explanation or otherwise, well, they might still be in technically the same, same pay, same benefits and everything else, but you might have completely disrupted their career path. The relationships they formed where they were are now moot. They have to start from scratch. They're the new guy. It might be a completely different aspect of the business. How do you determine significant disadvantage? But yeah, I guess it will come down to what was the motivation for doing so, and did it justify happening? You'd have to take that again on a case-by-case basis. So simply transferring somebody, I don't know if that makes a lot of sense without some additional qualifying information. And of course, if you had the qualifying information of, I was transferred because of my race, well, then that's already, I would think, and I'm not a lawyer, covered in the basics of Title VII to begin with. If they made a decision on your employment on the basis of your race or gender, et cetera, that's a violation in and of itself, regardless of what the decision was, right? If they did anything to your employment on the basis of those elements, they're in trouble. So I don't know if getting that specific, I guess I'd be curious to see how that case turns out.
What is allowable if this isn't maybe an employment action within the meaning of the law? And I'm not going to read it to you, but here's some excerpts of Title VII that highlight, exactly what does it that Title VII prohibits as an unlawful employment practice.
Okay, well, I'll read it since she won't. It shall be an unlawful employment practice for an employer, 1, to fail or refuse to hire or to discharge any individual or otherwise to discriminate against any individual with respect to his compensation, terms, conditions, or privileges of employment because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Or 2, to limit, segregate, or classify his employees or applicants for employment in any way which would deprive or tend to deprive any individual of employment opportunities or otherwise adversely affect his status as an employee because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. So again, you have to prove intent. You have to prove the mechanism that led to the decision. Simply transferring somebody all by itself, does that constitute an adverse action? No, unless you can show that the action was taken motivated by someone's race, sex, religion, national origin, etc. So I'm not quite sure how that first case is going to hash out. If that's all there is to it, I bet there's probably more to it than that. But anyway, and underneath that it says training programs. It shall be an unlawful employment practice for any employer to discriminate against any individual because of his race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in admission to or employment in any program established to provide apprenticeship or other training. Well, golly, looks like Meta's in trouble. Because wasn't their apprenticeship program explicitly dictated as you must open up a position on the basis of someone's color or race? That might be a law they can't get around. And also, given that, I'd be curious to know what happens with that Compass Group lawsuit, because that I don't know. Again, I'm no lawyer, but that sounds pretty cut and dry to me.
So in the interest of time, you'll have that for your leisure reading when the slides are sent out.
Oh boy, DEI practices to avoid parenthetical or at least review very closely and proceed with caution. Now, but remember, guys, this is not legal advice.
All right, so let's switch gears to the practical considerations for employers that flow from the Supreme Court decision and in the current environment.
But remember, this is not legal advice, but, you know, here's some things not to do, right?
So we're going to talk first about practices to maybe avoid, and I don't mean to say that these are per se unlawful.
Then why categorize them as that? Why?
Many of these are not necessarily unlawful.
Not necessarily unlawful, then why avoid them?
But they could increase risk.
They're not unlawful, but they could open you up to litigation. Just saying.
By creating evidence that could support a discriminatory motive. So the ones we're going to talk about here, I think, are practices that I would recommend you seek legal counsel if you have them or are considering them.
Oh, but remember, guys, this is not legal advice. I'm just recommending you seek legal counsel if you're using any of these practices. Okay, all right, I can't wait. I waited almost 40 minutes for this. All right, let's get to this. This is going to be great.
And the first is setting aside a certain number of jobs for females or minorities.
Oh, you mean percentage goals year over year?
Just like we talked about in that Meta case, where they have, they've created an additional position, and the intention is to help build a pipeline that has more diversity in it.
Yeah, except that is not a justification for racial discrimination. Why? Okay, you said you're going to stay nonpartisan about this, right? Well, now you're making apologia for a demonstrably, explicitly, and by the very legal terms that you just put on a card, illegal practice. But you're shrugging your shoulders and going, it's just for the sake of diversity, guys.
So there's definitely the best of intentions.
Oh, yeah. And what is the highway to hell paved with again?
But if you are earmarking a position based on race or gender,
yes,
it could certainly result in discrimination.
No. It doesn't result in discrimination. It is discriminatory by its very nature. What?
So that's one area to be pretty cautious in.
You're not going to mention the percentage year-over-year goal from your own example or anything else, or just talking about percentage goals in general? Really? You're going to bring up the meta one, which is almost unavoidably illegal. Okay.
Another one is setting unattainable or unreasonable goals.
Unattainable or unreasonable goals. Okay.
We've seen a lot of public statements about companies and their diversity goals.
Yes.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong or problematic with that.
It all depends on how they state them.
But I think if an organization isn't very mindful about how to do it and their methodology, it could become problematic.
It could become problematic if you state in public statements and in your own literature put out to your clients and so on that you have a specific percentage goal within a specific time frame that you are aiming for, and then just touting your successes and your progress in your percentage gains in particular demographics over time. That might be a problem. Might indicate a quota system. Might.
You don't want to commit to attain a certain level of representation.
Yeah, we want to have gender parity in our senior leadership by 2025. Right? We want to have a 3% increase in female employment year over year. Now, you don't want to do, it's true, you don't want to do that. She's absolutely right. If you want to avoid any questions of legality when it comes to your employment practices, you do not want to give specific goals. She says unattainable or unreasonable. That's got nothing to do with it.
Or a certain percentage increase by a certain date.
You mean like the example you put out earlier and you didn't have much to say about? Okay.
Without doing the math, is it even realistically, objectively obtainable?
It doesn't matter. As soon as you do it, you violated the law. What if it was reasonably obtainable? Right? What if I said, as a business, as a Fortune 100 company, and I said, we have a goal of increasing our senior leadership by 2% female within the next year. What does that indicate? What does that imply about what your attention is going to be based on when it comes to employment in senior leadership over the next year? Is it inherently illegal? Not until you show that you actually did it. Does it indicate you might be using some illegal practices, discriminatory practices in your hiring over the next 12 months? Yes, it's definitely worth a question. Is it possible to achieve that? Probably. I mean, what could effectively be chalked up to a rounding error as a goal? Sure. That doesn't make it less bad.
If you're not going to be taking protected characteristics into account. So you need to look at what your general attrition is, what's your history of attrition, what's your expected attrition, how many new opportunities do you expect to have? There was a lawsuit several years ago where the allegation was that the only way the organization could have achieved the goal that had been publicized would have been through either some kind of crazy attrition rates, and this person had been separated, or intentional discrimination.
And what's the third option? Because either you are hiring people in order to fulfill that demographic split, or you're firing people to attain that demographic split. You have to find some way to meet your numbers. And the numbers are only based on what a person looks like. So what other options do you have? Is there a third legal option where you're not affecting somebody's employment on the basis of their race or gender? I'd love to know what it is.
So be very mindful of goals that are set and use data to determine what an appropriate representation objective should be.
An appropriate representation objective. Representative of what? Of race? Of gender? Of orientation? Aren't you putting yourself under a microscope if you use any of those things? I don't know what else to tell you. 1 second here. Hello? I don't know if I can hear that. I'm being called right now. Hello? Okay. I'm on a stream right now. Hi. Well, I can use Discord at the same time that I'm streaming on StreamYard. Did that cause a whole bunch of sound issues? I don't know. Am I still streaming? Did I hang up on the stream while I was doing a Discord call? Somebody in the chat, let me know.
Tying compensation or bonuses to attainment of diversity metrics.
Yes, putting a bounty on demographic hires. Yes, that would be a no-no. You're right. This is something that companies should avoid. Are they doing it, or are they implying that there will be some consequences if you don't achieve the goals they've laid down that would affect your pay? Yes.
Again, this is not per se unlawful, but you can easily see how that type of practice can be used as evidence in a reverse discrimination case, and has been used.
Yes. If you are telling your managers to hire people of a particular type, and if they do so, they shall receive extra financial incentive. I think the fruit of the poison tree goes straight back to the edict by the managers in the first place, right? I mean, if you have a diversity metric you're trying to, the whole thing is rotten. Come on.
In cases.
Yeah.
Managers can be heavily motivated to hire a certain demographic if their income depends on a specific outcome.
Yes.
So this is just another area where I would tread cautiously.
Yeah, and that's also something that I often ask about, but rarely get a clear answer, if at all, and that is the word accountability. All right, we've heard that so many times in different promotional videos when it comes to DEI initiative, holding managers accountable, holding supervisors and leadership accountable. And what does accountability mean? Putting their pay at risk, right? Putting their jobs at risk, or their prospects at risk. I'm assuming if I can't recall a specific instance where they actually said what the consequences were, what accountability looks like, but I can only imagine that's one of the factors.
I mentioned diverse slate policies earlier. So diverse slate policies can vary. The one I'm referencing here is where race or gender is ultimately a factor for whether or not someone moves forward in the selection process.
So blatant discrimination, you mean? Diverse slate.
The EEOC has taken the position that it is discriminatory to screen or cull through recruits based on race or gender.
Yes. Well, good for the EEOC.
And the Commission's compliance manual on race discrimination specifically says that race cannot be used as a screening criterion.
But
obviously, when the Civil Rights Act was passed,
yes,
and in that context, the goal and the intent was to prohibit employers from excluding minorities or women candidates.
Is that what the law says? Really? Is that what the law says? The law says thou shalt not discriminate against minorities or women? Or does it say thou shalt not discriminate on the basis of race or sex? Yeah, no. The law was passed to even the playing field so that you could not discriminate against minorities or women, primarily. But that's not what the law actually says, does it?
But we know, of course, that the principle of non-discrimination applies equally to all races and all genders.
Both genders. Yes. Thank you.
So again, in the 1960s, the main intent was to prohibit discrimination against minorities and against women.
Okay. What is in law? That's what matters.
But we can't do the opposite and move people forward through the process just because they're a minority or just because they're a female.
Well, and yet diverse slate policies still exist. How do they still exist? How do people get away with that?
So, if an employer has a policy that says a hiring manager must consider at least one minority candidate, and the process moves forward and continues until one minority candidate is organically part of that pool.
Organically part of that pool?
I think that's likely permissible. You're not using race or gender in making a decision. You're making sure that the hiring manager has had the opportunity to consider a wide variety of different types of candidates.
Different types of, again, valuing race in any way, shape, or form. Depending on the circumstances, I don't know if it's illegal, but it just perpetuates the problem, doesn't it? Why make race a value factor at all?
And that's just me saying my opinion.
Oh, it is? Okay. Well, let's go back to Justice Roberts when he said eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. I don't know what to tell you. All these little remnants of valuing race do not help the problem. It just perpetuates it.
However, I think there is a concern where an employer has a policy that says our hiring managers must consider X number of minorities.
Yes. And like a quota?
Then to satisfy that, the recruiter culls through the applicant pools and picks out minority candidates to provide them.
Yeah, it's almost like putting race as a requirement or a note to consider leads to racial discrimination. It's amazing how that works. It's amazing the risks you open yourself up to when you make race something that has to be valued. It's amazing. Amazing.
In that situation, applicants are being advanced because of their race and at the expense of other candidates, which is what I think the Supreme Court was advising against in the Harvard and UNC cases.
At least in part, yeah, just a little bit. Just a little bit. Minor, yeah, just a little.
You also want to avoid only using diverse recruitment sources.
Oh, now this is new because I was told, and I've been told several times, and as far as I've known, if you, again, recruit as far distant from the actual hiring process as possible to make your talent pool contain specific demographics just on the odds of where you're actually advertising jobs in certain positions, then you're safe. Okay, so only using diverse recruitment sources like historically Black colleges and universities?
It is fantastic and great to use diversity recruitment sources.
Okay.
We recommend you use historically Black colleges and universities.
How could I guess? You recommend? Wait, is this legal advice now? I thought this wasn't supposed to be legal advice. We recommend. Okay.
Any other diverse recruitment sources. You just don't want to rely on them exclusively.
Right. That would look bad.
Employers, especially federal contractors, and under their affirmative action obligations have been required to seek out candidates through diverse recruiting sources. And that is still okay. It's highly recommended.
But
we just, again, want to avoid relying only on those types of sources. And this recommendation comes from the EEOC and the OFCCP, who have historically taken the position that using only word of mouth recruitment through existing employees can be a discriminatory recruiting process.
It can be. Okay.
because it tends to perpetuate the demographics of your existing workforce.
But it tends to perpetuate the demographics of your existing workforce. Wait, word of mouth within the internal, so people who are already part of the company and already have experience in the company that could, because of does race matter or not? Like, oh my God. Okay.
So I think that same position or argument could be made with any type of recruitment process.
Wait. So a diverse source is historically black colleges and universities. A non-diverse source is existing employees. Anything you want to clarify about that? What constitutes a non-diverse candidate for a job?
Tends to exclude people of a certain race or
does it? I don't know. Does it?
Or certain gender.
Oh.
In fact, we are seeing claims against employers that rely only on college recruiting for certain positions as being in violation of the Age Discrimination in Employment Act and limiting opportunities for not where an employer is not engaging in recruitment efforts to attract individuals who are over 40.
Huh. Well, that's interesting because I was under the impression that for all intents and purposes, recruitment practices, again, away from the talent pool, hiring room, interview process, was the safest place in which you could direct your discriminatory hiring practices, because it wasn't until an individual actually had to be decided upon directly by the company versus just saying, we're going to advertise this job or this program or whatever at this place, this institution or whatever. And more likely than not, the individuals that will see this job opening that will go towards it will be of the demographic or demographics that we prefer. And that's about as, sort of hands off you could get, legally speaking, when it comes to discriminatory practices. So there is a risk if you can prove a pattern and that they were excluding the opportunity from specific demographics. Interesting.
Limiting opportunities based on race or gender. I think
like an apprenticeship programs or something.
The law firm cases provide examples on these issues.
Yes.
And I think this is an area where employers are more likely to be vulnerable because they're acting with, and they have acted with, the best of intentions.
Oh, stop giving apologia to this. Okay, if you're going to be nonpartisan, if you're going to be balanced about this, just say, if you are going to provide opportunities to people on the basis of non-determinative factors as outlined in Title VII or Title VI, depending on what we're talking about, you are putting yourself under legal vulnerability. Full stop. That's it. The intentions don't matter. That's the whole point. Equality doesn't care about your intentions. Are you treating someone fairly or not? Are you assessing them as valuable on the basis of things that are determinative of merit, or aren't you? If you're not, then you're not. Well, I'm doing it for the greater good. The greater good it has nothing to do with nothing. Now, have we moved outside of your legal advice, or is this your legal determination, or is this just your personal opinion?
And there's been such a focus on creating and ensuring diverse pipelines.
What constitutes a non-diverse candidate?
Through the organization. And you see one or two large companies that adopt an initiative, and then everyone just jumps on that bandwagon.
Yeah, especially if they are an ESG-driven organization, and that's supposed to be the thing to do to, be a good company.
And thinks it's a fantastic idea, and they aren't necessarily stopping to think through all of the various legal implications that the Supreme Court decision and the resulting conversation has brought to light.
Okay. The Supreme Court decision on affirmative action had nothing to do with established law under Title VII or Title VI for employers. Nothing. Nothing. It was for college admissions. Like I said, I know I've said it several times over the course of the stream, but it still just irritates the heck out of me. At least in the scope of my knowledge, direct knowledge, the last 7 years, I have found example after example after example after example of companies openly and proudly declaring their discriminatory practices as good things. Out in the public, no repercussions. There's been no downside to doing so. And even when a company is punished for something that even comes close to violating the law, it is a fine that does nothing. The Supreme Court decision, shone a light on this and gave people, attorneys general and otherwise, some fuel for some rhetoric. But I'm still waiting for the hammer to come down, as it should have been this entire time.
And then last in this section, I wanted to include a reminder about supplier diversity programs. We are seeing lawsuits in this area now as well. It's not an employment issue, but these often go hand in hand.
Well, I mean, if you're hiring a supplier or a vendor on the basis of the race of those that own or run the business, that's called racial discrimination, or the gender. It's like, whoa, female-led. We need to focus on female-led businesses, right? Or all these initiatives to like black-owned business, or stay away from white-owned businesses or something. Yeah. What's the first element of decision? Yeah.
So just a reminder that Section 1981 does prohibit the use of race in making contracts.
Well, you could have fooled me. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm happy to be corrected, there was testimony given from a representative of Allstate Insurance Company before a congressional hearing, if I'm not mistaken again, that we looked at, where she was so proud of their supply line programs when it came to giving opportunities to minority-owned businesses. So, USC 1981 prohibits the use of race in making contracts. You could have fooled me.
So we want to make sure that when we're selecting our suppliers, that we are not basing that decision solely on an organization or an entity's race or
No. It doesn't matter if it's not solely. It says prohibits the use prohibits the use of race in making contracts. If it's 1% of the decision or 99% of the decision, it is illegal. It's not about solely. One drop of poison taints the entire soup. Come on.
For the makeup of their members. But I believe, just as we do for our applicant pools, it should be fine to make sure that we are creating a diverse pool of suppliers.
It should be fine. Is that your legal advice?
From which we are applying our non-discriminatory selection criteria.
Non-discriminatory selection criteria. And exactly how do you create a diverse pool with a non-discriminatory selection criteria in the first place? How does that work exactly? What constitutes a non-diverse supplier?
I don't think that's likely to pose any problems. Again, it goes back to the whole concept of affirmative action for federal contractors.
And that is starting to be questioned as a result of the college decision, isn't it?
The goal is to create a diverse pool of candidates to which you then apply your neutral, non-discriminatory selection processes, and then over.
You first create the pool using explicitly discriminatory policies and checklists. Then you can start applying your neutral checklists. So the first checklist, the first stage of that doesn't count. What is Section 1981 say again? prohibits the use of race in making contracts. So what? Just, man, sometimes I'm glad I'm not a lawyer. I'm really glad I'm not a lawyer. Just trying to navigate this rhetoric as a layman is bad enough. Imagine trying to spin it for the sake of my client.
Over time, you will see the diversity of your workforce and hear your suppliers increase.
Yeah, again, I know I'm a broken record. I would love our speaker to define for me what constitutes a non-diverse supplier. What elements make a supplier not diverse?
On to the positive side. What are some best practices?
Okay, guys, just as a note, I'm both in sitting still and an overall voice and everything else. I'm starting to wear out. So I'm going to give her this next section, and then I think I'm going to call it, because I think let's see, how long have I gone now? 2.5 hours. Yeah, I think I've done my duty, both as far as informational and as far as therapeutic for myself. So I'll give this next section as the end. So we've had the DEI practices to avoid. Here come the best practices. Are you guys ready? Okay, we've heard the worst. Now let's hear the best.
On the DEI front, one of the first recommendations I have is that if you have a specific policy or practice and it uses the word minority or women, replace that with white or male and see how it sounds.
Okay, well, credit where credit is due. That's not bad advice. If you want to cut through some of the ideological haze that people create for themselves to make their way through the battlefield of whether or not they're actually doing something possibly illegal and or immoral, that's not bad advice. Replace minority with white and see if it sounds lawful. Jeez. I mean, it is the simplest advice, but again, as I've talked about before, the symbolic logic symbol for two things that are technically different, but are effectively the same. Compare them one to the other. Yes. See what happens when you replace one word with the other and see how it sounds.
If it makes you cringe, you might want to take another look at it. What I think is happening, certainly, as I mentioned with the Winston Strawn challenge.
Yes.
Their argument is we're not focusing on race. We're talking about the underserved, the underrepresented, the underprivileged.
Yes.
And if you use terms like that don't exclude people based on race, but can still offer benefits to people from different backgrounds, maybe less affluent backgrounds that haven't had the same opportunities.
They're not talking about class. If it had to do with the economically disadvantaged, they would have said economically disadvantaged. They didn't say economically disadvantaged.
Then I think those are likely going to pass muster. And certainly you can take advantage and use the language from the Supreme Court's decision that talks about focusing on people's life experiences and their character.
They don't say character either, do they? You are, well, for a second there, I thought you were going to take them to task. You're still coming up with apologia for them, aren't you? Do you have friends at that law firm or something? Are your two law firms like partners in something together or have some connections otherwise? That's just bizarre.
Rather than race or ethnicity.
Yeah. So you bring up that admittedly simple but very on point advice, and then you take the opportunity to continue giving cover to a law firm using word games to get around saying race or gender. Okay.
Placement goals, we talked about what not to do, but if you're going to set placement goals.
If you're going to set placement goals, you mean demographic quotas?
And certainly federal contractors do that. There's nothing there's nothing per se unlawful about them.
Per se.
You just want to make sure that you're basing them on objective factors.
like things that don't involve illegal elements such as race, gender, orientation, religion, etc.?
You're not pulling a number out of the air that you think sounds good. Make sure that they're reasonably achievable.
It doesn't matter how reasonable the number is. Is it predicated with a demographic outlined as illegal under law in which to evaluate someone's opportunities? Why does she come up with this reasonable thing? If that's a reasonable quota, it's still a quota.
Typically, the expectation is that they will be achieved gradually and incrementally.
Oh, yeah. My discriminatory practices is a slow rolling one. That makes it better.
You can expect generally overnight success because it takes a while.
Yeah, at least 25 by 2025, according to the International Air Transport Association.
To move that needle.
Yeah, move that needle. By what mechanism?
Again, depending on how many openings, what your attrition is, and so forth. And I also recommend that you measure your achievement by the percentage of placements.
Measure your achievement by percentage. So you're recommending quotas. You're recommending measuring success by percentage of demographic. Okay. Is this your legal advice that you're not supposed to be giving in this presentation?
A more defensible way to set goals and to measure your progress, because it's based on the number of placements and the percentage that are filled by the targeted group.
Demographic, not group. Do not monolith people. Demographic.
For example, if 1 out of 10 openings is filled by a minority, that's 10%. And
yeah. Was there an edict to achieve a 10% hire or placement of minorities?
If you had a 10% goal, then you would have achieved it.
Oh, okay. So if all I have to do in order to safely have a placement goal is to open up 1 out of every 10 jobs and make sure it's filled by somebody who's not white, that's fine?
During that time period. Of course, that was just one placement, so it would not have changed your overall representation very much.
What has that got to do with anything? What does that... I have put someone into a position in my company, first and foremost, based on their race. What does the representation have to do? I have just, at the very least, in this hypothetical situation, flirted with illegality, putting it mildly. What are you talking about? Representation.
But you have to take into account the number of opportunities that you do have when you're measuring progress.
That made absolutely no sense. That made absolutely no sense. Oh, you didn't change much as far as representation, but oh, well, if I had changed much about representation, then what? I get a pass?
Make sure that your employment practices are neutral.
Unlike the previous example I just gave that I implied was perfectly okay by increasing my workforce 10% by opening up positions and giving them to people specifically on the basis of their race. That's neutral, guys. That's neutral. What?
And that we don't have any practice where race or gender is a factor in making an employment decision or providing a benefit.
What did you... In your last 3 examples, or 2 or 3, what have you been recommending? What have you been giving cover to? What? I can't help myself.
What? You gotta be fucking kidding.
right?
That's just something else. Okay, keep going.
Of employment. You go back to that text of Title VII. It talks about the terms, conditions, and benefits of employment.
Right.
It's a best practice to analyze your selection processes and practices to determine if there's any adverse impact that is occurring against or on the basis of race or gender.
Any decision made in employment on the basis of race or gender is an adverse impact on the whole idea of equal rights. That is the long, that is the short. That is why Title VII and other laws involved in the Civil Rights Act make it so plain and leave little to no room to maneuver on what is at the very least legally questionable. If you give someone an opportunity on the basis purely or in a tiny percentile of their race or their gender, that is an adverse impact in and of itself on the whole idea of working towards a better and fairer society. So, yeah, your selection practices should have absolutely nothing to do with either of those two demographic fits at all, if you want to be ensuring there's no adverse impact, period.
So this one's more about removing inadvertent barriers that you wouldn't otherwise know exist if you don't look behind the curtain, so to speak.
Oh, don't talk about language in job postings or something, or on applications, right? The vocabulary used is blah blah blah. Like, I don't know if she's going to say that. That is the first thing that came to my mind after so many years of this.
To see what results your practices are having. And if you are using artificial intelligence in your selection process, it's definitely super important to analyze the effect it's having to see if it has any adverse impact on protected characteristic.
I hadn't heard about AI in hiring practices, or at least not anybody talk about it outright. Oh, that'll be something to look at as time goes on.
You want to make sure you're conducting a periodic review of your DEI policies and practices.
Get rid of them all. That's the review. Get rid of all DEI practices. It's not worth the risk. It never was, never has been. That should be the review for any business that actually wants to follow the law and save themselves a world of pain now and into the future. Just drop it. You might take a PR hit. You might, fail on your ESG rating for a quarter or two, as if that's going to matter for much longer, because people are finding out that ESG doesn't actually lead to better outcomes financially for companies. Just drop them. Rip the Band-Aid off quick.
Conducting an equity audit of your DEI programs is important to see if it's actually working.
Actually working, yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to know ahead of time that what you're doing is actually going to achieve results? And all depends on what those results are, especially if they deal with quotas.
Is it doing what you would expect it to be? Is it not going far enough? Do you need to make some changes?
Advocaz Diabli asks in the chat, if I can bring up the chat here real quick. Why is there broccoli in that inbox? That's not broccoli. That's a chia chia pet.
And obviously, you also, as mentioned, want to make sure it is not having a discriminatory effect. And actually,
again, you want to make sure your DEI policies do not have a discriminatory effect. I know. I'm sorry. I can't help myself. Define a non-diverse candidate. How is it avoidable? They all discriminate. They're all based on diversity. The first letter in DEI should be discrimination, but they've cloaked it in diversity. Come on.
Here's a little plug. A colleague and I did a session earlier this year on conducting a DEI audit.
Ooh, was it a struggle session?
Laura DeLeon and I did that. So if you missed it and want a link, just send me an email. My email information will be at the end of the session, and we'll be happy to get that to you.
I wonder if that's on their YouTube channel.
Victoria will let me know if we don't have it and I overcommitted, but I think we do.
We do have it.
Awesome. Thank you. Make sure you're using a wide variety of recruitment sources, including those that focus on protected groups.
That was your best advice for the whole recruitment process earlier. Doesn't that just come? Okay, I guess it's, yeah. Don't recruit from just these places. Be sure to recruit from a bunch of places. Okay, well, I guess that was already kind of baked into the last one.
You just want to make sure you're not stating a preference for certain race or gender in your advertisements.
No, yeah, not in your advertisements, just in your yearly goals.
Job description.
Job descriptions. I knew it. How did I know this was going to come up? The language and job descriptions. Oh boy, here we go.
These, I think, really present a good opportunity for employers. Make sure that you're updating them and reviewing them. Their jobs change all the time, and the minimum qualifications can change, or you might think they might become outdated. And they can, when that happens, they can unnecessarily screen out qualified people. And the two areas that I have the most concern about oftentimes are the education requirements.
Yeah, so markers of one's personal merit. Why you want to reduce them?
Does someone really need to have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree for this?
I don't know, but here's the thing. I've often seen and interpreted a college degree as, something of a rubber stamp depending on the position, but also a signifier that this person can, at the very least, achieve a goal. It is evidence that I worked towards achieving a goal, a demonstration of at least the barest notion of having a work ethic. Now you could find something that fits into that same category, technical college, some kind of other certification and elsewise. But as a general idea, having a college degree at least indicates to employer, at the bare minimum, this person possesses some kind of work ethic. It's not just lip service, it's evidence thereof. Might not be the best evidence. It'll prove out over time, obviously. And not everybody with a college degree ends up keeping the job that they have or succeeding or otherwise, but it's a marker. So, now if you're going for something very specialized, then certainly I would probably want to have somebody that either has very specific certification or education in a subject before I'd consider them for a job. You're talking about like an engineer or a scientist of some kind or otherwise, or some specialized field. It's probably a better look.
This position, because those types of educational requirements will often screen out women and minorities.
Education requirements, because women and minorities can't get educated? What?
So if it's not necessary, and if you can replace that with experience.
Sorry, wait a second. I have been told again and again and again and again that the vast majority of bachelor's degrees over the last 10 years have gone to women. Like the percentage difference between attainment of bachelor's degrees between men and women have shifted so mightily that more and more women are getting bachelor's degrees than men. So just having a bachelor's degree, what? So education requirement excludes women? 50% of the population on the basis of education? Okay, if you say so.
Then you should consider including that in the job description. And physical requirements. Those can have a tendency to screen out individuals with a disability.
Well, if they have a disability that prevents them from fulfilling the physical requirements of a job, then yes.
So make sure that they accurately reflect the requirements of a job.
Okay, fair play. As long as they do that, it still might exclude someone with a physical disability. Just saying.
You want to try to use gender neutral terminology. I think that's those of you that use Chat GPT or other artificial intelligence. Those types of programs are good at writing drafting job descriptions.
Yeah, don't lean on AI too much, guys. Really, proof your work before you put it out there in the public square. There might be some oddities coming out of AI for some reason.
And you can tell them how to do it in certain ways, but you obviously need to make sure a human reviews it and certainly is assessing it for all of your legal requirements. And I also think it's a great idea to advertise the organization's equal opportunity status and the importance of DEI to the organization.
Now, if there isn't a contradiction in terms, we're an equal opportunity employer, and let us tell you about our DEI program.
In your job descriptions or job postings, so that potential applicants see that and see how important it is to the company. There are lots of surveys that show, especially with the younger generations, that is a significant factor when they are deciding what employer, where they want to go work.
Okay, we're almost at the end of this thing. Is this entire section taking up the rest of this? Okay, I guess I'll just tough it out for another couple minutes.
So candidate pools.
Yeah.
Ensuring that candidate pools are sufficiently diverse before you are applying your selection process.
Define diverse. What constitutes a non-diverse candidate? I know, I'm terrible. Thank you, you're ridiculous lunatic, very much, very generous of you for the thank you, Dogcat Fox. Oh, Dogcat Fox.
Whoa-wee. Whoa.
That is a tailed feature, Dogcat Fox. Thank you so much, Luna, appreciate it. Very generous. I think we're nearly done with this, nearly done. Yeah, ensure candidate pools are sufficiently diverse. How much of a percentage of my candidate pool has to be quote unquote diverse? How shall I arrive at that? What is sufficient and what is diverse?
This is different than what we were talking about before. This is different than different from passing applicants through the process because of their race.
No, it isn't. You just said ensure candidate pools are sufficiently diverse before applying selection process, which means you have already applied some kind of filter or selection process before you get to the selection process. What are you talking about?
Or their gender. Here, what we're talking about is making sure that the demographics of the entire candidate pool for a specific position are reasonably in line with what you would expect them to be based on the availability data for that role.
What? How? Oh, the sirens. Can you hear the sirens? Lots of sirens. What are you talking about? How would you achieve that? I'm genuinely curious, not being facetious at all. But if she's saying don't have a selection process that is racist, which obviously you don't want to have, obviously, but make sure your candidate pool's sufficiently diverse. How does that work?
And I think it's permissible to continue recruiting until you get that critical mass.
Yeah. Just keep trying until the right kinds of people are in the. How is that not discriminatory? What are?
But we are not considering the race or gender of any specific candidate.
Yes, you are. In the aggregate, if there's not enough the right kind of people, then the people you already have don't count. You talked about hiring and attrition, right? Well, if the people in front of you don't make the cut in your mind because they're not the right look, then you're discriminating, aren't you? Have I lost my last brain cell on this kind of thing? Am I completely off base here?
In this circumstance.
And
then once the pool meets that
however you're supposed to arrange for that without being discriminatory.
Objective or reasonable diversity criteria, you move forward and apply your neutral, non-discriminatory selection process.
Yeah, except you haven't, have you? There's no neutrality there. You just said, keep spinning the wheel until you get the result you want. And the result you want is based entirely on aesthetics. And then you can apply your neutral. No, you don't have neutrality by predicating it with discrimination. Fruit of the poisoned tree. I've lost my mind.
I need to speed up. We're getting close to the end of our hour. review and assess your selection process.
Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I need to get up. I need to move. I need to go do something else. I need to eat. I haven't had dinner yet or anything. We've gone through an hour of this on the video. We've gone 3 hours on the stream, which is just beyond of my usual. But circumstances of the day, I guess I just needed some catharsis. So I'll take a second for anything you guys would like to say at the last. If you have anything, put in the comments now. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit the like button on the way out. Leave a comment afterwards if you're watching this in the future, or if you just want to say something that I missed in the meantime. Again, apologies for the short notice when this first started. Wasn't planned, just needed to have something to take my mind off of current events otherwise. And of course, I'll be here Thursday regularly at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for TED Excellence. Where I'll take a look at something perhaps even more confounding than this. I don't know. We'll see what happens on Thursday. Luna, yeah, I've got to get up at 4 a.m. Appreciate the stream subscribe. So do I. I got to be up at 4 a.m. too. Mike R, goodbye. Bye, Mike. Let's see. Deter Jones, a degree means I fell for a scam. All depends on the degree. All depends on your intentions and your plans. It really does. It really does matter. The original Shroom, a great stream, Scribbles. Thank you, Shroom. Appreciate it. But yeah, everybody, apologies. I'm going to have to cut it quick. I got to get up. I got to move around. Got to do something else. Either way, let me know what you think about this. Leave a like on the way out. I forgot to even mention at the top of the chat box, got the GoFundMe's up there for Maddie and Angry Illinoisian. Please take a look at those if you haven't already. Donate if you can. Share them out if you're able. Either way, appreciate it. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do, and I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Everybody who donated either to myself or if you happen to, the GoFundMe's at the top of the chat box. Thank you guys so much for your generosity. I hope everybody has a good rest of their Monday. I hope your Tuesday and the rest of the week ahead of you is fun and exciting and positive. And if not completely, at least enough that it's not too terrible. And I hope you're all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.